Chapter 2794. Yixian won another match, but he won by a fluke. 1357924? 6810 GGGGD. It could be said that whether it was Yixian himself or the other spectators, they all felt that Yixian's victory this time wasn't because of his strength, but because of his luck. This was because everyone could tell that Yixian hadn't gained the upper hand this entire time. It was the enemy who gave Yixian the chance to win. Of course, no matter what, a win was a win. Even if it was luck, luck was also a part of one's strength. Re-1 at this moment. Yixian was guarding the arena by himself. There was still one last battle left. The final battle would determine the final outcome of this arena. Obviously, that person from the demon god's domain wasn't going to give Yixian any time to rest. With a leap, that person had already arrived at the arena. Yixian silently looked at that person. Yixian could feel a powerful pressure from him. This person's body emitted a faint pressure of the laws, causing Yixian to understand that this person was definitely not ordinary. One had to know that they were only at the Divine King realm, and the power of the laws could at most be borrowed. However, this person was able to emit the pressure of the laws. Of course, no matter how strong he was, there was only death for him today. Because didn't Yixian leave the eternal domain behind for this moment? No matter how strong he was, Yixian would definitely crush him. That person walked onto the stage with an incomparably cold expression. He indifferently looked at Yixian and actually said, "I'll give you a chance. Understand it yourself." Yixian raised his brows slightly. This person was so confident, but he didn't know where his confidence came from. System. Detect this person's strength. Ding. System notification. Target, 1st grade sovereign level God King realm. Ding. Warning, warning. Host, please pay attention. The target has a special divine ability. Divine ability blessing? What did that mean? However, Yixian couldn't be bothered to care so much. This fellow had the title of sovereign level, so he was indeed very powerful. Moreover, the fact that he could emit the pressure of the laws already proved that he was extraordinary. But so what? Is that so? In that case, I will return those words to you. You can kill yourself. Perhaps it will allow you to suffer less. The corners of Yixian's mouth curled into a faint smile as he spoke to that person. Human brat, you are very arrogant. Has no one ever told you that if you are too arrogant, you will die a miserable death? That person's face was still cold, but Yixian snorted disdainfully at his words. The current situation was that this fellow was arrogant, not Yixian. As he spoke, a black ball began to condense in that person's hand. However, lightning constantly flashed around the black ball. Devouring and lightning laws. He had actually perfectly fused the power of the two laws together to form a new attack method. Yixian couldn't help but be slightly stunned. This person's methods were very powerful. Even though Yixian possessed many types of laws, he'd always use one type of law power as an attack method. It could be said that Yixian had never seen someone like this who had fused two types of laws together to attack before. That person casually waved his hand and the ball abruptly charged towards Yixian. Yixian had no choice but to use the power of the law of space to continuously dodge. Yixian's speed was extremely fast. After all, with the speed of unlimited teleportation, he was able to travel 10,000 kilometers in the blink of an eye. However, even with such a fast speed, Yixian still wasn't able to escape the black ball's attack. At this moment, Yixian could clearly feel the powerful attractive force coming from beside him. Yixian, who also possessed the law of devouring, naturally knew exactly what kind of power this was. In the distance, powerful bolts of heavenly lightning continuously bombarded him. In other words, once Yixian was pulled over by this attractive force, he would undoubtedly die. Stop struggling, human brat. Just obediently accept your death. You are not my match. The genius from the demon clan's god's domain said indifferently, as if everything was already under his control. Yixian frowned slightly, but he didn't hesitate. Since he knew that he couldn't do anything to this person using conventional methods, why would he waste any more time? System, if I use 5 eternal points, I will activate the eternal domain. Ding! System notification. Exchange successful. Following the system's words, a ray of light suddenly exploded out from Yixian's body. The light instantly spread out. Following that, a huge ball appeared in the arena. The ball was incomparably huge, and it directly included all the geniuses of the demon god's domain. Powerful energy instantly poured into Yixian's body. His various attributes increased by 100 times, causing Yixian to feel as if he already possessed the power to rule over everything. At the very least, it was impossible for this genius from the demon god's domain to threaten Yixian. The powerful attraction continued, but Yixian didn't care at all. Instead, he smiled and allowed his body to be attracted over. Heavenly lightning instantly surrounded Yixian and continuously bombarded him. The already powerful light caused Yixian to completely lose sight of his figure. A moment later, the genius from the demon god's domain actually said to the referee in the sky, "What? Aren't you guys going to judge the result?" The meaning behind these words was obvious. He was certain that Yixian had been killed by his lightning. However, none of the experts paid attention to him. Instead, they all looked at the center of the lightning with fear in their eyes. It was fear. These experts saw a scene that they couldn't understand. At this moment, Yixian was indeed being continuously attacked by countless bolts of lightning. Amongst these bolts of lightning, there were some that possessed the power to instantly kill a first-grade divine king. However, when all of the heavenly lightning struck Yixian's body, it didn't pose any threat at all. Defense. Yixian was already immune to lightning. No, it wasn't as simple as immunity. Yixian casually waved his hand and captured a bolt of heavenly lightning. Then he watched and studied it with interest. He had actually forcefully captured the enemy's attack method in his hands. Moreover, he didn't care at all. What's wrong? When the genius from the demon god's domain saw the reactions of the judges, he naturally knew that something had happened. Thus, he subconsciously looked towards Yixian's position. However, what he saw next was an incomparably terrifying scene. The black ball he'd just thrown out was actually quickly restored by Yixian. Moreover, along with the restoration process, the genius from the demon god's domain could clearly feel that the black ball had completely escaped his control. A moment later, the black ball was already floating in Yixian's hand. As for Yixian, he was still studying it. Chapter 2795. After all, the strength Yixian had displayed was too shocking. The moment he made a move, he killed 2 of their companions in succession. In that case, would the next one be them? It's His Highness the 7th Prince. We are His Highness the 7th Prince's guards. A voice rang out, but it wasn't the one who had wanted to answer Yixian. The one who had rushed to answer was the one who had insisted on not revealing the secret. Yixian's lips curled as he looked at that person. "Did I ask you a question?" Boom! The god-slaying sword rushed over, and one after another sword light after another rushed over. If one strike didn't deal a critical hit, then what about 10? How could that person have expected that even though he had taken the initiative to answer, Yixian wouldn't let him go? Nor did he expect Yixian's attacks to be so strange and powerful. Finally, a strike dealt a critical hit, heavily injuring that person. How could the god-tier mounts by his side let go of such a good opportunity? They all charged forward. Without a doubt, that person had no chance of survival. "Grandmaster Yi, I'll speak right now. I'll tell you everything you want to know. I beg you, please don't kill me." The last person stared at Yixian in shock. Right now, he was only thinking about how to survive. He would be lying if he said he wasn't afraid when he saw his companions being dismembered by those god-tier beasts. They were Yi Lixio's guards. Normally, they could bully the weak with ease, but when faced with a strong opponent, they didn't have the slightest bit of courage. "You want to speak now? It's too late. I said before that whoever tells me what I want to know can live. Unfortunately, I already know what I want to know. So you can go die now." The god-slaying sword and all the other god-tier mounts charged at that person. If that was the case, how could he possibly survive? Another kill. How long had it been since the 4 of them had jumped out and been killed by Yixian? "QWPM, you said you wouldn't kill me." At the moment of the last person's death, there was still a longing for life in his eyes. What a pity. Since she cherished her life so much, why did she come looking for trouble with Yixian? Yixian did not devour their universe rings after collecting them. Resources were extremely useful to Yixian now. The 4 of them had been killed by Yixian. However, Yixian was still quite angry in his heart. Absolute defense wasn't something that could be obtained just because he said so. Not to mention the cooldown time, even the singularity wasn't that easy to find. It could be said that Yi Xian's absolute defense wouldn't be able to be used for a short period of time. This was definitely something that Yi Xian found hard to accept. Therefore, he needed resources to use the mirror image mystique. Otherwise, Yi Xian had no confidence in facing a sudden attack like this. Of course, it wasn't like Yi Xian didn't have any trump cards. For example, he hadn't used his summon the world skill yet. This was because there was no opponent worthy of Yi Xian using all his strength. It would only take a little more time to break the chain restriction, but it wasn't impossible to break it. Soon Yi Xian broke the chain restriction. However, Fian's figure appeared in front of Yi Xian. "Girl, not bad. Your life-saving methods are not bad. This makes me feel much more at ease," Yi Xian said with a smile. He did not blame Fian for not making a move because in Yi Xian's heart, he did not want Fian to protect him. Who knew that as soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, Fian would casually throw out 2 corpses. "Young master, these 2 people were hiding in the dark. They wanted to take advantage of the 4 people attacking you to launch a sneak attack on you, so this little girl took care of them." Enemies hiding in the dark. Yi Xian was shocked. It seemed that he had to thank Fian this time. One had to know that during the battle just now, there was a time when Yi Xian could be said to be completely defenseless. The 1,000 beast sword attendants, divine ranked mounts, and god-slaying swords were all sent out. Yi Xian was practically defenseless and his invincible defense was on cooldown. If these 2 people had suddenly attacked Yi Xian at that time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. What a good plan. What a good plan, one step after another. Unfortunately, they had still failed. Yi Xian casually took away the 2 Qingquan realms and suddenly had an idea. At this time, Yi Lixiu did not know that the subordinates he had sent out had all been killed. He was still waiting for good news. In his heart, the trap he had set up was definitely enough to kill Yi Xian. It was definitely a perfect plan. However, all of a sudden a voice sounded from outside. "Your Highness, Grandmaster Yi requests an audience." "Grandmaster Yi? Which Grandmaster Yi?" Yi Lixiu was taken aback. In his heart, Yi Xian had probably been killed long ago. So when he suddenly heard Grandmaster Yi, he didn't react in time. "It's Yi Xian, Grandmaster Yi." How could the guard know what his master was thinking? He actually answered honestly. The guard's words made Yi Lixiu's hair stand on end. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. That brat, shouldn't he have been killed by now? Why would he appear outside his tent? Unfortunately, Yi Xian had already charged in. Right now, there was no one in the alliance who didn't know Yi Xian. In their eyes, Yi Xian was definitely a mysterious expert. Moreover, they wouldn't dare look down on Yi Xian just because his cultivation base was low. So when Yi Xian charged in, the guards didn't dare to directly stop him. "Yi Lixiu, 7th Prince, haha. You've given me quite a generous gift. However, it's impolite not to reciprocate, so this time I'll give you a gift as well." Yi Xian smiled as soon as he entered Yi Lixiu's tent. That brilliant smile made Yi Lixiu wonder what Yi Xian wanted to do. Could it be that those people didn't have time to attack? In Yi Lixiu's heart, this was the only thing he could think of. After all, in his heart, killing Yi Xian was practically a foregone conclusion. However, when Yi Xian casually threw a bag of things in front of Yi Lixiu instantly panicked. Because Yi Xian didn't even try to hide that thing. He didn't even need to open it to see what was inside. 6 heads. They were the 6 people Yi Lixiu had sent out. Besides 1 peak heavenly god, the other 5 were all domain enlightened spirit gods. But how long had it been since they left? And now their heads were thrown in front of Yi Lixiu? Haha, since the 7th prince likes to give me gifts, then I won't mind. If you have any more gifts in the future, feel free to send them over. Yi Xian will accept them all. Yi Xian clearly knew that Yi Lixiu was the mastermind behind these people. However, Yi Xian didn't directly kill Yi Lixiu. It wasn't because this was the camp of the alliance, but because Yi Xian wanted to test whether Yi Lixiu had any other companions. Chapter 2796. When the last shadow disappeared, Yi Xian had already been automatically teleported out. Ding! The host's bloodline has been successfully strengthened. Please note that the host's bloodline has been strengthened to the highest level and cannot be strengthened further before a breakthrough. Ding! The host's weakened state has ended. The host has regained his original divine power. Rank 1 Superior Heavenly God. Following the system's notification, Yixian finally emerged. In his hand he was holding a mirror-like treasure. It seemed that this was mirror image fate. This was the thing that had trapped Yixian for so long. Yixian looked at the treasure in his hand but did not say anything. A teleportation array. Suddenly Yixian saw a teleportation array. To be honest, Yixian had seen countless teleportation arrays, but the one in front of him was undoubtedly the most familiar. Outside the ruins of the fortress, there was still endless slaughter and lingering thoughts. He was now at the core of the battlefield of the sovereigns. Originally, Yixian did not have much hope of leaving. He did not expect to be able to leave so easily. However, this teleportation array made Yixian very happy. Even Yixian did not know where the teleportation array led to. Without hesitation, Yixian stepped into the teleportation array. However, a strange scene occurred. Rays of light erupted from the teleportation array and locked onto Yixian, as if automatically searching for something. Yixian was stunned and became more and more alarmed. Could this be a directional memory teleportation array? I did not expect such a thing to actually exist. This teleportation array chain can remember all teleportations within a restricted area. No matter where you enter, if you want to leave, all you have to do is step into any one of the teleportation arrays and you can leave. Yixian had heard of such a thing before, but he had always thought it was a legend. He did not expect it to be true. Meanwhile, in Emoshang Pavilion, the Fifth Hall Master and everyone in the Fifth Hall were waiting silently. Today was the last day of the deadline. Suddenly, a faint light came from the teleportation array. Didn't this light mean that someone was about to pass through the teleportation array? In an instant, everyone's spirits were lifted. Could it be that Yixian had returned? The light swirled and a figure appeared. If it was not Yixian, who else could it be? Good boy, I knew you wouldn't die. Wang Tianjin strode over to Yixian and gave Yixian a vicious punch. However, there were tears in his eyes. What happened to you all? Yixian felt something tugged at his heartstrings. Isn't it all because of you, kid? Half a year ago, everyone who was able to return had already returned, but you were nowhere to be seen. For more than half a year, the sect wasn't willing to wait, but my father insisted. He even used the Fifth Hall's resources to support the teleportation array, and to prevent the sect from closing, he brought us along to guard this place. Luckily you're back, Yixian was shocked. He even felt his nose slightly sour. Some words were easy to say, but it was not so easy to actually do it. Suddenly, Yixian laughed. Master, you're so good to your disciple. It looks like your disciple will have to work harder in the future, so that he can take care of you when you're old. It was as if it was the first joke, but only Yixian himself knew what kind of weight those words held. If Yixian had only felt a sense of belonging to the Fifth Hall before, then Yixian had already treated the Fifth Hall as his second home. To Yixian, his enemies had to be ruthlessly suppressed and destroyed. But Yixian would repay those who were good to him 100 times over. Because Yixian had the right to say that. Yixian's return surprised many people. Of course, Yixian was a disciple of the Fifth Hall. The others were only surprised and did not say much. Only the Fifth Hall held a grand celebration. However, before the celebration began, Yixian received a voice transmission talisman from his master's wife. It's for you. It was delivered a few months ago. It's from a little ant who claims to be your maid. She said that she had something urgent to tell you. But you didn't come out, so I kept it for you. Thank you, master's wife. Yixian lightly smiled as he directly crushed the sound transmission talisman. It was indeed Fian's voice. However, Fian's report shocked Yixian. Master Ye of Lingxian Court wants me to tell you to be prepared. If nothing unexpected happens, there will be a huge change at Lingbo Lake in half a year. Moreover, they have no confidence in winning. Master Ye wants me to tell you that you must leave Lingbo Lake immediately. Otherwise, it will be difficult to guarantee your safety. The message was short, but Yixian already understood what had happened. It could be said that Yixian's trip to the battlefield of the Masters of Gods this time was, strictly speaking, a waste of time. Apart from obtaining a mirror of unknown use, he obtained a remarkable ability that required a large amount of resources to activate. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had suffered a loss. However, He did not expect that there would be a huge change outside as soon as he came out. Lingbo Lake. Was it the ancient sword intent? Yixian had to obtain that thing, even though Yixian knew that it was extremely dangerous. However, no matter how dangerous it was, could it be more dangerous than the battlefield of the Masters of Gods? Where was it? Yixian could be said to have already died once. Could it be that the ancient sword intent was stronger than the Lord God's space? Master's wife, disciple wants to leave for a while to deal with some matters. I know what you want to do, but I won't allow you to go. It's too dangerous there. You're not strong enough. Yixian was slightly shocked. It was not strange that his master's wife could guess what he wanted to do. However, why was she not allowing him to go? Master's wife, disciple has to go. That matter was caused by disciple, and disciple must take responsibility until the end. To be honest, Yixian was very timid in the fifth hall. The reason was simple. He had concerns. Otherwise, he would not need to ask his master's wife for instructions. However, for Yixian, concerns were not bindings. In any case, I won't agree. Even if you go to your master, it's useless. If I say that you're not allowed to go, then no one can let you leave. She was right. His master's wife's words were 100 times more effective than his master's. What should he do? Yixian was at a loss. However, as soon as his master's wife left, he saw his master sneak up to Yixian like a thief. Master, what are you doing? Sure, lower your voice. Do you want your master's wife to hear you? Here. Yixian was stunned. He did not know what his master gave him. What are you looking at? Do you think we're all fools? That little girl called Fian has come to our fifth hall several times in the past few months. Moreover, do you think we don't know about such a big matter? Chapter 2797. After all, the ones buried here, even the weakest, were all super experts of the inferior God Emperor realm. 1357924? 6810 GGD, not to mention the God Emperor realm. Even if anyone with divine deity fell, it would be very difficult for their corpse to be destroyed. Without tens of millions of years, the corpses of these experts would not be able to decay. Of course, there were some special things about this secret realm. Within this secret realm, there was a strange power of law everywhere. This power of law could be said to be of no use at all, because their only use was to speed up the speed of the corpses here. Of course, there were other things in the secret realm that would speed up the decay of corpses. At this moment, Yixian was standing on a circular platform. This was the reception platform. Those who used the token to enter the ancestral secret realm would all appear on a platform similar to the one beneath Yixian's feet. This was because this secret realm had no entrance or exit. If one wanted to enter, they could only use a teleportation token. If anyone were to accidentally lose their token, they would probably be trapped to death. Yixian didn't move. Instead, he silently stood on the reception platform and carefully observed his surroundings. Before entering this place, there was no map or any information about this secret realm. If Yixian wanted to investigate this place, he could only choose his own route. With this reception platform as the center, broken continents could be seen everywhere. Perhaps this secret realm used to have a complete continent, but it was divided into countless small pieces. Above these broken continents were the existences that Yixian needed to investigate this time. This was because some of the broken continents were the tombs chosen by the experts who entered. Not far in front of Yixian there was a continent. On the continent, a magnificent palace stood towering. However, Yixian didn't have any intention of investigating. He was so close to the reception platform. If there was any inheritance, Yixian wouldn't believe it. Yixian didn't observe for too long because no matter how he observed, he couldn't see anything without experiencing it himself. With a leap, Yixian flew high into the air. Yixian didn't have any specific goal. Right now, he was just randomly choosing a direction. Pieces of broken continents retreated from Yixian's side. As for Yixian, he was also constantly choosing his target. Finally, a broken continent attracted Yixian's attention. On this broken continent, there were no palaces or anything like that. However, there was a strange and mysterious plant growing on it. One had to know that in this secret realm of the ancestral land, there wasn't even sunlight, yet there were plants. This was already somewhat strange. Yixian directly landed on the broken continent, then said to the system, System, scan this thing. I want to see what exactly it is. Ding. System prompt. Scan successful. Target. Ghost vine. Ding. System prompt. Detected a special plant, ghost vine. Host can find the heart of the ghost vine and level up the 1,000 vines. Ding. System prompt. The ghost vine is formed from the divine power and laws of a fallen expert. It is said to be a plant, but it has an instinctive meaning. The initial judgment is that it is dangerous. Host, please pay attention. Danger? This was the ancestral land, the graveyard of countless experts. It would be strange if there wasn't any danger. However, he didn't expect that he'd discover something good that could be used to advance the 1,000 vines just as he arrived. In that case, Yixian naturally wouldn't miss it no matter what. The heart of the ghost vine? No matter what kind of existence it was, as long as he killed the ghost vine, he would be able to find it soon. Yixian pulled out the god-slaughtering sword. At the same time, he had Wei Zhentian transform into a magic treasure. Afterwards, the two god-slaughtering swords circled around Yixian, on guard at all times. At the same time, Yixian took out the rule god bow and held it in his hand. 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant. Yixian directly summoned the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant. He wanted to use the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant to test the strength of the ghost vine. Following Yixian's order, the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant summoned its divine rank mount and charged over without the slightest hesitation. Yixian stood on the spot and didn't make any unnecessary movements. Instead, he silently waited. The 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant led the divine rank mount and continuously charged forward. At this moment, these ghost vines seemed to be ordinary plants and had no reaction at all. Of course, the system notification said that the ghost vine was a dangerous existence. Therefore, Yixian didn't believe that this thing was that simple. Suddenly, a section of the ghost nether vine moved. Speed was incomparably fast. Even though Yixian had completely enveloped the area with his spiritual will, he could only sense that the ghost vine had moved a little. However, he couldn't sense what it had done because its speed was simply too fast. However, in the blink of an eye, at least 10 divine rank mounts had already disappeared. Yixian immediately gathered his spiritual will there. A moment later, he discovered that the divine rank mounts had already been completely wrapped up by the ghost vine. This ghost vine was like a divine serpent that tightly wrapped around the arena lord's divine rank mount. A moment later, the divine rank mount was strangled to death. As for the upgraded mount, it didn't have the slightest ability to resist in front of him. What a powerful defense! Yixian clearly saw that before a divine rank mount died, it fiercely bit the ghost vine. Unfortunately, it was useless. This nether ghost vine actually possessed an incomparably powerful defensive power. System, detect the strength of this ghost vine. How can its defense be so high? Ding. System prompt, detection successful. Host, please note that the nether ghost vine has a special ability. All of the nether ghost vines here are actually only one, and the nether ghost vine can, according to its own will, gather all of its branch power at any location. Yixian was slightly shocked in his heart. One had to know that in front of Yixian, the ghost vine filled every corner of this shattered continent. Even calling it a forest wouldn't be an exaggeration. However, he didn't expect that it was only one stalk. Super Devouring System, his special ability to condense energy, also caused Yixian's eyes to light up at the same time that he was shocked. One had to know that, for example, Yixian's 1,000 vines. The defensive power and attack power of each vine were actually average, but if they could condense their power, then the increase in combat strength wouldn't be just a little bit. Whether it was used in a head-on battle or as a sneak attack, it would definitely have an unexpected effect. Imagine Yixian using the 1,000 vines to fight an enemy. Originally, the 1,000 vines didn't seem to pose any threat at all, but when they got close to the enemy, they suddenly gathered their strength, causing one of the vines to suddenly possess an extremely powerful strength. Any enemy would probably be caught off guard. Good stuff. Good ability. Chapter 2798. If Qiantong had this ability, wouldn't it be incomparably powerful? 1357924? 6810 GAD. However, this wasn't the only surprise. Just as Yixian was observing this section of the ghost nether vine, dozens of different types of law energies suddenly attacked the god rank mount. These were dozens of different types of law energy. Could it be that this ghost vine had actually grasped dozens of types of law energy? System, what's going on? Why is the ghost vine able to grasp so many types of law energy? Ding. System prompt. The ghost vine has a special ability, devouring storage. Ding. The ghost vine will automatically capture the law energy that it can capture. Once it successfully captures it, it will store it and explode when needed. There was such an ability? Yixian was slightly stunned. This ability was simply too strong. However, it was probably only suitable for rented land. After all, there could be super experts entering the rented land at any time and dying within. And what was the power of the laws? It was a special power that couldn't be explained clearly. Even a God Emperor stage super expert could only borrow the power of the laws. However, when they reached the main God Emperor stage and fell, the power of the laws that they borrowed might stay for a period of time, giving the ghost vine a chance to capture it. If it was anyone else, such as the enemies that Yixian had killed, how could they have allowed the power of the laws to remain? At the same time he fell, the power of the laws automatically disappeared. Therefore, not to mention the fact that Yixian could obtain this power, even if he did, it would be useless. However, from the looks of it, it would undoubtedly become an obstacle for Yixian to kill the ghost vine. Thousand Beast Feast. Yixian activated the ability of the Thousand Beast Feast, causing his ability to level up his mount to increase once again. Although Yixian didn't expect to be able to defeat the ghost vine with just the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant and the Divine Rank Mount, Yixian also hoped to be able to figure out the various abilities of the ghost vine through the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant and the Divine Rank Mount. The ghost vine continued to fight with the Divine Rank Mount, but it seemed like it was simply crushing it. Although the Divine Rank Mount continued to attack, even if they could destroy some of the ghost vines, it would still be futile. After all, there were simply too many ghost vines here. How much could a God-tier mount destroy? Suddenly, Yixian discovered a problem. The ghost vine that was destroyed by the Divine Rank Mount didn't seem to immediately grow back. The corner of Yixian's mouth slightly curled up. In the beginning, because of the 1,000 vines, Yixian thought that the ghost vine could grow indefinitely, but now it seemed that this wasn't the case. Flower God Sword Attendant. Yixian casually summoned the Flower God Sword Attendant. Previously, Yixian didn't summon the Flower God Sword Attendant because he felt that even if the Flower God Sword Attendant came out, it wouldn't be of much use. However, now that he saw that the ghost vine couldn't grow indefinitely, Yixian naturally changed his mind. Go destroy as much as you want, Yixian ordered. Very quickly, all of the Divine Rank Mounts and the 100 Flowers Flower God began to wildly destroy. It wasn't just them. At this moment, Wei Zhentian also charged out with the 2 God Slaughtering Swords. Yixian pulled the Rule God Bao time and time again, and all of them shot out Devouring Law Divine Arrows. Yixian's current goal was extremely clear, and that was to destroy this ghost Nethervine as much as possible, regardless of everything else. Divine Rank Mounts were constantly being killed, but at the same time the ghost vine was constantly being cut off. Pieces of the ghost vine fell to the ground, and a moment later, it turned into black smoke and disappeared. Yixian didn't care about this at all. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to destroy to his heart's content. Even if the power of the ghost vine could be condensed, it was still condensed through his countless vines. At this moment, Yixian was continuously cutting off his vines. Didn't this mean that he was constantly weakening his strength? Although the Divine Rank Mount and the 100 Flowers Flower God were continuously disappearing, Yixian wasn't at a disadvantage. Finally, when the last Divine Rank Mount was killed, Yixian decisively withdrew from the battle. He was waiting for the cooldown to end. Then a new wave of attacks would erupt. Yixian wanted to grind this 1,000 vine to death. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, finally the vast majority of the ghost vine had been cleared out. At this moment there were only a mere 100 or so ghost vines in front of Yixian. These ghost vines were no longer a threat to Yixian. At the same time, the so-called ghost vine's heart was finally revealed. It turned out that this ghost vine seemed to be able to condense energy. This so-called ghost nethervine heart was also distributed among all of the vines. As Yixian continued to kill, the power of the ghost nethervine heart could only continuously retreat to the remaining vines. Plants are plants after all. Unfortunately, although you possess such powerful strength, you are still just a ghost vine. You only have battle instincts, but you do not truly possess intelligence. Yixian indifferently looked at the ghost vine in front of him as he spoke in a soft voice. Even though he knew in his heart that the ghost vine couldn't hear what he was saying at all. Kill. With Yixian's order, the cooldown was over once again. Then, he summoned the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant and the Flower God Sword Attendant and charged forward with their divine rank mounts and the 100 Flowers Flower God. The two god-slaying swords did not fall behind either and charged forward as well. One by one, the serene ghost vines were cut off. Finally, when all the serene ghost vines disappeared, a dark green ball of light remained. That was the so-called serene ghost vine heart. 1,000 vines. Yixian didn't hesitate in the slightest. Didn't he fight for so long to strengthen the 1,000 vines? Qiantung suddenly rushed over and absorbed the group in a moment. But unfortunately, he did not advance. That's right, it would be great if Qiantung could advance so easily. However, Yixian could clearly feel that Qiantung's strength had increased by a lot. Especially the current Qiantung, who already had the ability to condense energy. His power was naturally even greater. Equals Yixian didn't delay any longer. He stood up and once again charged into the distance in search of his next target. However, what Yixian didn't know was that this ghost vine was only the lowest level of existence in the ancestral land. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it a weed. Ranner, just a mere weed in the ancestral land, possessed such powerful strength that it blocked Yixian for more than half a month. Re1R from this, it could be seen just how powerful this ancestral land was. Actually, Yixian was very clear that it was impossible to explore this ancestral land in one go. Chapter 2799. After leaving this shattered continent, Yixian quickly arrived at another shattered continent. 1357924? 6810 GGGD. Ever since he left the first shattered continent, Yixian had always asked the system to maintain its detection state. And here the system gave Yixian a hint. Re1R ding system prompt detected a special material that can be used to repair the god-slaying armor, suggesting that the host collect it. Yes, it was the material to repair the god-slaying armor. Ever since Yixian obtained the god-slaying armor, it could only be stored in his universe ring because the damage to his chi was too great. However, he didn't expect that he would actually find the right materials this time. Yixian naturally didn't hesitate and quickly arrived at the top of the shattered continent. When Yixian saw the thing on the shattered continent, he couldn't help but be moved. Because in front of Yixian was a building that looked like an inverted pyramid. Yixian didn't know what this building was made of. However, there was a door at the very bottom. From this door onwards, the entire golden pagoda continued to enlarge. Yixian walked in and discovered that this door was actually an elevator. He only needed to control it with his spiritual will, and then activate his divine power to rise upwards. This place was like a treasure trove. However, there wasn't anything down there. Even if there was, it had already been taken away. It wasn't until Yixian entered the 99th floor that he saw the first item. A box made of unknown wood. Yixian didn't hesitate and directly jumped down from the elevator. The box was extremely simple and didn't seem to be anything special about it. However, when Yixian tried to use his spiritual will to investigate the contents, he was shocked to discover that his spiritual will couldn't see what was inside at all. What exactly was this thing? Open. Yixian hesitated for a moment, but in the end he still opened it. Of course, the necessary preparations were still necessary. After all, the other places on the 99th floor were incomparably empty. Only this box was placed at the intersection. Such a conspicuous position, yet no one took it away? No matter how he looked at it, it was abnormal. Yixian wielded the divine rule bow and retreated 100 steps. Wei Zhentian controlled the two god-slaughtering swords and prepared to attack. Afterwards, Yixian summoned the Wanchuan sword attendant. The Wanchuan sword attendant didn't have much attack power, but his senses were extremely sharp. If there was any danger, he would be the first to feel the rescue. Therefore, it was most appropriate for him to open the box. However, when the Wanchuan sword attendant tried, he was shocked to find that he couldn't open it at all. Could it be that the Wanchuan sword attendant was too small and didn't have enough strength? Although this reason was somewhat laughable, Yixian could only think of it this way. Without any hesitation, Yixian summoned the withered bone sword attendant. In any case, the withered bone sword attendant had long since been eliminated. Yixian didn't know how long it had been since he'd used it to fight. Using it to open the box could be considered letting him out for a breather. However, the withered bone sword attendant was still unable to open the box. Damn it, what's so special about this box? Yixian frowned slightly. Megatron, destroy this box for me. Yixian directly gave the order. Megatron instantly moved, and the two god-slaughtering swords continuously slashed at the box. It was useless. Even the god-slaughtering sword was unable to split open this mysterious box. This time Yixian's interest was piqued. Without bothering to take too much, Yixian directly walked towards the box. Yixian put away the rule god bow, then extended his hand over. Suddenly, an incomparably violent suction force exploded out, and the divine power on Yixian's body surged into the box like a tide. Damn it, what's going on? Yixian was greatly shocked, but he couldn't do anything about it. System, quickly think of a way to solve this. Yixian could only call for help from the system. At this moment, other than thinking, Yixian couldn't move a single inch. Even his heartbeat had completely stopped. As for the divine power, it was constantly being sucked away by the box. Just what in the world was this damn chest? Why did it have such a strong attraction force? Ding! System prompt. Detected that the host has been affected by an unknown situation and has suffered a severe loss of divine power. Searching for a solution. Ding! System prompt, search failed. Activate emergency plan. Ding, resources successfully exchanged for divine power. It wasn't easy for Yixian to save up that little bit of resources, but at this moment, they were continuously transforming into divine power and being absorbed. That box was like a bottomless pit that continuously devoured Yixian's divine power. Ding! Resources exhausted. Activating the exchange of faith points for divine power. The resources were gone. Yixian was overwhelmed with shock. At this moment he wasn't able to react at all. He could only allow the box to continuously devour the divine power in his body. It had always been Yixian who devoured others. He never thought that there would be a day when he would be devoured. Most importantly, it was a box that had devoured him. The faith points quickly disappeared as countless amounts of divine power flowed into Yixian's body. However, it was quickly absorbed by the box. Ding! System prompt, faith points exhausted. It's over. This was the first time Yixian had such a feeling in his heart. However, before he could think too much about it, he felt that the box had actually focused its attention on the devouring space, and was quickly absorbing divine power from the devouring space. Yixian's heart was incomparably sorrowful. Could it be that today he was really going to be sucked dry by a box? Yixian finally understood why no one would touch the box. It was because those who touched the box had already been sucked dry of their divine power. But what was this damn thing? Why did it appear here? Even if it appeared here, why was it so powerful? Yixian wanted to close his eyes, but unfortunately he couldn't move. A large amount of divine power flowed out of the devouring space. Yixian could even feel that the plants and creatures inside were dispirited. Just how much divine power had this box devoured? Crack! Suddenly there was a light sound, and then the box slowly opened. Could it be that he had devoured so much divine power just to open this box? If that was really the case, then wouldn't this box be too much? Suddenly, a ray of light flew towards Yixian. Yixian could feel that there seemed to be something above his head. At the same time, the system notification rang out. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to host for accidentally discovering the ancient god Emperor's crown. Ding! The Emperor's crown has recognized the host's identity as the ancient god Emperor's successor. Chapter 2800. Lord God Emperor, in order to make it easier for our fire clan to observe everywhere, we have set up some organizations in many places. As for Emoshang Pavilion, because Emoshang Pavilion is a little special, we have increased our investment. That Lingxian Pavilion is a force that was personally set up by the third clan leader of the fire clan, to make it easier for us to investigate Emoshang Pavilion. What? Yixian was dumbfounded. He had never thought that the Lingxian Pavilion was actually a member of the Fire Tribe. In other words, the Lingxian Pavilion had been part of Yixian's force from the very beginning. Now everything made sense. Why had the Lingxian Pavilion given him a Pavilion Guardian Elder's clone? And why had he gone crazy when he found out that Yi Xian had given him an order? Because the Ling Xian pavilion had belonged to Yi Xian in the first place. In other words, it belonged to the inheritor of the ancient god emperor's inheritance. And he, Yi Xian, was the new god emperor. In that case, wouldn't he be the master of the Ling Xian pavilion? Yi Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry about the ancient lost clan. After all this fuss, Yi Xian had been under the protection of the Ling Xian pavilion all this while. However, Yi Xian didn't know whether to be happy or angry. Happy. After all, Yi Xian was pleasantly surprised that he had suddenly gained such a large force. Yi Xian's strength had also increased by a lot. Angry? Damn it. If he hadn't gone to the Ling Xian pavilion, the people there would never have told Yi Xian the truth. Damn, there were so many good things in the Ling Xian pavilion. If Yi Xian had used them directly, he would have broken through many levels by now. Alright, I understand. Yi Xian sat down speechlessly. Lord God Emperor, the third patriarch still has something to tell you. Go ahead and speak. I'm listening. Yes, Lord God Emperor. The Fire Tribe clansman suddenly knelt on the ground, making Yi Xian frown slightly. Then he said, Lord God Emperor, the 3 clan leaders want me to tell you that the strength of the ancient era's lost clan is very limited, and the enemy we need to fight against is extremely strong. Ling Xian Pavilion is the strongest force in the Fire Clan, so this time we can follow your orders. After all, some conflicts have already existed. However, this is only the first time. In the future, the Fire Division will not be able to obey your orders so directly. What? Yi Xian frowned the Divine Patriarch's explanation. Please use your strength. The third clan patriarch said that if Lord God Emperor wants to blame us, please wait until we destroy that powerful existence first. Yi Xian nodded and said, Yes, you're right. I understand. Then we'll do as you say. However, we can't relax our investigation of Emoshang Pavilion. We must find out the secrets of Emoshang Pavilion. Yes, Lord God Emperor. Alright, there's nothing else. You can go about your business. Yi Xian waved his hand and dismissed the Divine Patriarch. Yi Xian smiled bitterly after the Divine Patriarch left. QWPM. Although the third patriarch's words were vague enough, Yi Xian understood the meaning behind them. Perhaps it was right to hide their strength. More importantly, the higher-ups of the Fire Tribe had not completely accepted Yi Xian. Because of their ancestral teachings and clan rules, they had no choice but to serve Yi Xian as their master. However, Yi Xian was too weak now. They would not completely submit to Yi Xian. To put it bluntly, the ancient lost tribe belonged to Yi Xian, but also did not belong to Yi Xian. After all, too many things had changed in the span of hundreds of millions of years. It was still unknown how loyal the ancient lost tribe was to Yi Xian. Perhaps they would follow Yi Xian without hesitation if he was strong enough. However, Yi Xian was not strong enough. Strength. Everything depended on strength. Sometimes, even if Yi Xian encountered a great opportunity, he would not be able to fully control it if he was not strong enough. For example, Ling Xian Pavilion could be called the Ancient Lost Tribe. However, Yi Xian quickly adjusted his mentality. That was right. Why should he entrust everything to others? Yi Xian was Yi Xian. He didn't have to rely on others for anything. It didn't matter if the ancient races were willing to obey him or not. However, Yi Xian's own strength had to increase. The next morning, Yi Xian appeared in a place he had never been before. Many people were stunned. The mission hall. In Emoshang training camp, many people usually performed missions in exchange for points. However, Yi Xian had never been there before. This was Yi Xian's first time here. At this time, the situation at Ling Xian Pavilion had exploded to a new height. As for the people in the training camp, they had a new understanding of Yi Xian. It could be said that in the entire training camp, at least in the outer camp, no one dared to say no to Yi Xian. However, he clearly had great power and authority. Yet Yi Xian had come to Emoshang training camp and was preparing to accept a mission today? The girl in charge of issuing missions was dumbfounded. It was not strange for anyone to come here, except for Yi Xian. Yi Xian's appearance caused him to be unable to react. Young Master Yi, may I ask what is the matter? Oh, I'm here to accept a mission. Can I take a look at the mission list? Yi Xian did not care about the gazes around him. They were not him, so how would they know about his affairs? The girl hesitated for a moment. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and placed all the missions in front of Yixian. The missions in Immersing training camp were divided into levels: easy, normal, difficult, and nightmare. These 4 levels represented 4 different types of missions with different levels of danger. Simple missions had an average casualty rate of almost 0. Normal missions had a casualty rate of 20%. Difficult missions had 50%. Nightmare missions had a casualty rate as high as 70%. Of course, according to the mission, the rewards would be different too. Moreover, every mission had a minimum realm requirement. Yixian did not have many choices. In fact, apart from the simple missions, there were only 2 difficult missions in front of him. Mission 1. A powerful divine beast appeared in Centauria Valley. Centauria Valley requested help from Immersing training camp to repel or kill that evil divine beast. The realm requirement was limited to mid-level celestial god. Chapter 2801. Yixian didn't hesitate and directly walked forward. Beside Yixian, 2 god-slaughtering swords continuously revolved around him, preparing to kill the fish that slipped through the net. On the outside, divine bone overlord ants that were controlled by their spiritual senses continuously created a corridor for Yixian. 1357924? 6810 Yixian walked forward step by step. Beside him, battles continuously erupted. 1 divine bone overlord ant after another fell beside Yixian. Unfortunately, it didn't affect Yixian in the slightest. He didn't know how far he'd walked. After all, this place was like a maze going around and around, causing Yixian to lose his direction. Fortunately, he finally walked out. At this moment, what stood in front of Yixian was an incomparably huge divine bone overlord ant. And this was the queen of the divine bone overlord ant. Ding! System notification. Designated target, 3rd grade inferior god king realm. A divine ant of the inferior god king realm. As expected of the ancestral ground's secret realm, it seemed that anything that appeared was not rare. This queen was countless times larger than the other divine ants. The most important thing was her body. This queen was actually half human and half ant. System, what's going on? Could it be that this queen is about to evolve into a human? Ding! System notification. Data analysis in progress. Ding! System notification. The target is a spirit god-type creature that accidentally mutated after the death of a god-emperor, who cultivated the ant ancestor's sacred art. Divine ability mutation? Yixian was stunned. Ever since he entered the progenitor realm, all sorts of strange and bizarre things had happened. However, this was only a mere 3rd grade inferior god king realm. Yixian was already a 4th grade inferior god king. So how could he not be able to do anything? He didn't waste any more words and directly launched an attack. Thousand Beast Sword Attendant, Flower God Sword Attendant, take me to block the entrance. Don't let the other divine ants come and cause trouble. With Yixian's order, 1,000 divine level mounts and 100 flowers flower gods suddenly appeared, sealing off all the intersections and fighting with the reinforcements of the divine ants. As for Yixian himself, he charged towards the queen ant Wei Zhentian Go. Wei Zhentian controlled the 2 god-slaughtering swords and charged towards the queen ant without any points. The 14 god slashes were suddenly unleashed. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. The violent power caused the queen ant to retreat several steps, but she wasn't injured in the slightest. The power of the deity slash had only caused the ant to retreat a few steps. Yixian frowned slightly. Wasn't this defensive power a little too great? Swish swish. A strange sound wave came out from the queen ant's mouth. It was obvious that Yixian's actions had angered the queen ant. The sound waves quickly reverberated in this layer of space. Countless divine ants immediately became incomparably irritable and fearless as they charged forward. One after another, the divine ranked mounts were drowned by the divine ants. These divine ants had gone crazy. Feast of 1,000 Beasts. Since Yixian had activated the 1,000 Beast Feast, he didn't have the time to support the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant. Thus, he could only hope that the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant would be able to last a little longer. Damn it, I don't believe that I can't do anything to you, you evil creature. Yixian pulled open the Rule Divine Bow, and one ruled divine arrow after another flew towards the queen ant. A powerful ray of light suddenly flashed out from the queen's body, directly blocking most of the law arrows. However, there was still a portion of the law arrows that hit the queen, but it was useless. Even Yi Xian's most proficient arrow of the law of devouring couldn't cause the slightest bit of damage to the queen. How was this possible? Yi Xian frowned. He'd finally met an enemy who was clearly at a lower cultivation level than him, yet he couldn't do anything to them. Absolute Zero. Yi Xian once again released his ultimate move. Absolute Zero was able to freeze the queen ant. When Yi Xian released Absolute Zero, the queen ant didn't have time to dodge at all, so she was directly frozen. However, after being frozen, Yi Xian and Wei Zhentian's God-slaughtering sword attacked at the same time. They were shocked to discover that it was useless. It was the armor on his body. It was the armor-like layer of skin on the queen ant's body that was actually able to withstand all of Yi Xian's attacks, including the God-slaughtering sword. How was he supposed to fight? Yi Xian was dumbfounded. His attack was useless against him, so how was he supposed to play? Even after being hit by Absolute Zero, no matter how Yi Xian attacked, he couldn't break through his outer shell. How could he kill him? Yi Xian's figure explosively retreated. At the same time, he was already rapidly thinking in his heart. It was very obvious that the special material detected by the system was probably the queen ant's outer shell. This was because such a strong outer shell was indeed qualified to repair the God-slaughtering armor. However, if he wanted to obtain this outer shell, then Yi Xian would undoubtedly have to kill this queen ant. What was he going to do? The power of the laws was almost useless against it. The God-slaughtering sword was so sharp, yet it couldn't break through his outer shell. Then what could Yi Xian count on now? Spiritual sense control? No, this queen ant's spiritual force is much stronger than Yi Xian's. Yi Xian isn't able to control the queen ant at all. Then what other methods did he have? Suddenly Yi Xian's eyes lit up. He thought of a feasible method. Mighty heaven-shaking magic treasure form. Following Yi Xian's order, the God-slaughtering sword automatically returned to Yi Xian's hand, and Wei Zhentian also rapidly changed. 1-2. Finally, in the third form, Yi Xian found what he wanted. This was a strange sledgehammer, but it had one ability, and that was to grow bigger. Moreover, there were no other additional effects. If it was in the past, Yi Xian probably wouldn't have even glanced at this thing. But today Yi Xian was waiting for such a blunt weapon. The laws were infinite, and the armor was ineffective. Then what about the blunt weapon? Grow bigger. In the next moment, the large hammer instantly grew larger, and Yi Xian directly swung it down with his sledgehammer. Absolute Zero. In fact, Yi Xian even restricted the queen ant's movements and continued to smash it. Once, twice, 3 times. Yi Xian didn't even know how many times he'd smashed it. However, under Yi Xian's berserk attacks, the queen ant was finally smashed to death. It wasn't that the queen ant didn't resist, but being smashed down by such a blunt weapon one after another, what could he do to defend against it? Under Absolute Zero, the queen ant couldn't even make the slightest movement. She could only be smashed to death. At this moment, if one looked from the outside, the queen ant didn't seem to have changed at all. However, after being smashed countless times by the giant hammer, even the queen ant's divine deity had been smashed to pieces, let alone anything else. Yi Xian lightly smiled. With a wave of his hand, he directly absorbed the queen ant's corpse into his devouring space. After all, this queen ant was used to repair the god-slaying armor. Chapter 2802. After all, the ant queen had only cultivated a tough outer shell. She did not cultivate everything in her body to be as tough as it was. 1357924? 6810 GGG. To this time, Yi Xian killing the queen ant could be said to be a coincidence, but the main reason was that Yi Xian had grasped the queen ant's true weakness. At this moment, the defensive line formed by the 1,000 beast sword attendants and the god-rank mounts could no longer hold on and was directly broken through. Of course, Yi Xian didn't care about this at all. With a flash, he activated his infinite teleportation and instantly arrived at the elevator. The reason why he had to go in step by step was because Yi Xian wanted to find what he needed. At this moment, since he'd obtained the item, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't delay any longer. A moment later, Yi Xian arrived outside, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he prepared to repair the god-slaughtering armor first. System, I have the materials. Let's start forging. Ding, system notification, forging begins. Ding, system notification. God slaughtering armor has been successfully repaired. Currently, the damage is 50%. Host can already use it. Since he could already use it, Yixian wouldn't waste it. He directly put on the God slaughtering armor. After being forged by the system, the appearance of the God slaughtering armor had greatly changed. A few ribbons of divine power automatically spread out and revolved around Yixian, adding to his sense of mystery. Yixian was very satisfied with the God slaughtering armor. However, just as Yixian was about to continue carefully observing the God slaughtering armor, countless divine ants chased after him from the inverted horn golden tower. Yixian didn't hesitate and immediately leaped up, quickly leaving this place. That's right, after Yixian killed the queen of these divine ants, it would be strange if they didn't go berserk. In the ancestral land, Yixian didn't have any goals. He only casually explored. Next, Yixian found some materials that were useful to him. There was no time limit in the ancestor realm. As long as you could stay inside, you could stay for as long as you wanted. This was because the ancestor realm was only rewarded to super geniuses who had made outstanding contributions to the divine realm. Therefore, there were relatively few people who were qualified to enter. Of course, it was impossible to stay in the ancestor realm forever. Even if you could endure the loneliness of the ancestor realm, the powerful corrosive power and the various powerful existences that could be seen everywhere would force you to retreat. Yixian relied on the system's prompts to avoid danger time and time again. Even though he knew that there was something good ahead, as long as the system gave a warning, Yixian would decisively give up. In any case, there wasn't anyone here to fight with him, so there was no need for Yixian to provoke those powerful existences for the sake of a treasure. Rather than that, he might as well find a few more treasures that were slightly inferior. However, sometimes plans couldn't keep up with changes. At this moment, Yixian was stumped by the choice in front of him. Ding, system prompt, special material detected. Calamity Universe Crystal Core. Ding, system prompt. The Calamity Universe Crystal Core can be used by the system to strengthen various sword attendants. At the same time, if the host swallows it himself, he can also obtain special attributes. Ding, warning, warning, a powerful divine beast has been detected. Sword intent, host, leave immediately. The series of system prompts directly caused Yixian to hesitate. Calamity Universe Crystal Core? It was another type of crystal core that Yixian had never heard of before. In fact, Yixian's sword attendant did indeed feel a bit weak, but he hadn't found a suitable material to strengthen it, so Yixian had no other choice. But now, there was such a strengthening technique in front of Yixian that could be used to strengthen his sword attendant. However, if he wanted to obtain the materials, he had to defeat that divine beast. Moreover, it was a divine beast that the system had alerted him of. How to choose? For a moment, Yixian was in a dilemma. This time, Yixian had no choice but to think carefully. After all, something like the Calamity God Crystal could be said to be something that could only be encountered by chance. Once he succeeded, then Yixian would make a huge profit. But at the same time, if he failed, then Yixian would have no choice but to activate the token and leave. This ancestor realm wasn't something that could be entered just because one wanted to. Only by obtaining the token from me, you would one have the qualifications to enter. Therefore, he didn't know how long he would have to wait for the next time he wanted to enter. If he failed, then Yixian didn't know how many resources he would have to miss. Should he go to the shattered continent at this moment? Yixian gritted his teeth. In the end, he still decided to enter. Yixian was going to take a gamble. After making up his mind, Yixian directly landed on the shattered continent. In an instant, a powerful force locked onto Yixian. Ding! Warning! Warning! Host has been locked onto by a powerful divine beast. Yixian released his divine will in an attempt to find the divine beast's location. Very quickly, Yixian discovered him. This was an extremely strange divine beast. Re-1R, this was because this divine beast only had 1 foot, but 5 hands. Its eyes were all over its body, but it didn't have a mouth or a nose. Instead, it had an ear. The strangest thing was that its ear was actually its mouth. It could be said that Yixian had never seen such a strange divine beast before. System. Detect what exactly is this thing? Ding. System notification. Target. Divine Resentment Beast. Divine Resentment Beast. If a God Emperor expert was unwilling to die, there would be a chance of forming such a divine beast. Their appearances were randomly generated, but they had one thing in common, and that was that they were able to inherit a special ability or law of the fallen God Emperor. The Divine Resentment Beast would give birth to different personalities based on the final regret of the fallen God Emperor. The resentment contained within the Divine Resentment Beast that Yi Xian was facing right now was actually loneliness. When the God Emperor had fallen, although he had voluntarily come to the ancestral land, he hadn't died immediately. Instead, he had lived here for 1,000 years. 1,000 years had caused the God Emperor's heart to be incomparably lonely. Thus, when he finally fell, the only obsession in his heart was that he hoped for someone to accompany him. And this obsession had transformed into this Divine Resentment Beast. What it wanted to do the most was to make everyone who entered his territory stay behind and accompany him forever. The Divine Resentment Beasts all had one thing in common, and that was that they were unwilling to leave their original place of residence, which was this broken continent. It could be said that no divine beast in the ancestral land would easily leave their territory, and this Divine Resentment Beast was even more extreme. It could be said that the vast majority of Divine Resentment Beasts had never left the shattered continent where they were born. This Divine Resentment Beast's greatest resentment was that it wanted someone to accompany it forever. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly descended. He didn't hesitate at all as his aura locked onto Yi Xian. As soon as Yi Xian landed on the ground, he felt slightly regretful. That was because the Divine Resentment Beast was a Grade 1 mid-godly king. Chapter 2803. Inextricable. It would be extremely difficult to defeat this Divine Resentment Beast. Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to summon the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant and the Flower God Sword Attendant. This was because Yi Xian knew that summoning them wouldn't be of much use. Now it was up to him to see what kind of powerful methods a Divine Resentment Beast had. It could be said that if the divine ability or law he inherited was a little stronger, then Yi Xian wouldn't have any chance and would be forced to use the token to teleport immediately. However, how could Yi Xian bear to leave? The God-slaughtering sword was pulled out, and Yi Xian was quickly thinking of a countermeasure. There were many buildings on this shattered continent. It was obvious that his original owner had made this place very beautiful, but it was also because it was too unique that it showed the unwillingness in this person's heart. Yi Xian didn't know why this person died, but he knew that even if this person died, he would still be filled with unwillingness. Unfortunately, even if it was so beautiful, what could it do? In the ancestral land there was no sunlight, no life, nothing. No matter how beautiful it was, it would only be appreciated by one person alone. Of course, Yi Xian wasn't observing this to guess what that person was thinking before he died. Yi Xian just wanted to see if he could use the terrain to his advantage. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was disappointed. There was nothing here. Yi Xian silently observed his surroundings. The Divine Resentment Beast was also silently observing Yi Xian. Moreover, although he completely locked onto Yi Xian, as long as Yi Xian didn't make a move, he wouldn't attack Yi Xian. After Yi Xian carefully examined his surroundings, he finally gave up on the idea of borrowing the terrain. It seemed that this time he could only force his way through. If he could kill this Divine Resentment Beast, then Yi Xian would be able to obtain a large amount of benefits. However, once he failed, there would be nothing left. Whoosh! Following Yi Xian's order, Wei Zhentian instantly transformed and controlled the two God-slaughtering swords to charge towards the Divine Resentment Beast. Perfect hit. However, Yi Xian wasn't happy at all. This was because the God-slaughtering sword had directly passed through the Divine Resentment Beast's body without causing the slightest bit of damage to it. Yi Xian frowned. This guy was actually immune to physical damage. God Slash. In an instant, Wei Zhentian controlled the two God-slaughtering swords to unleash the God Slash. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. All of them hit the mark. This time there was indeed a reaction, but the effect wasn't as good as expected. The God-slaying slash sliced the Divine Resentment Beast into several pieces, but in the blink of an eye, it actually fused back together. Damn it! A divine rule bow immediately appeared in Yi Xian's hand, and he shot out an arrow without hesitation. This time Yi Xian used a divine talisman. This divine talisman's attack method was fire. In an instant, the divine talisman exploded, and a huge ball of flames surrounded the divine resentment beast. However, when the flames extinguished, Yi Xian was shocked to discover that it still had no effect. Yi Xian launched 3 attacks in a row. The first 2 attacks were directly ignored by the divine resentment beast, but the third time it finally angered the divine resentment beast. The divine resentment beast suddenly moved, and one of its hands rapidly grew longer and larger, instantly arriving beside Yi Xian. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom! Yi Xian was actually sent flying by a single punch. Fortunately, with the protection of the god-slaying armor, Yi Xian didn't suffer too much damage. However, this punch also allowed Yi Xian to witness the power of the divine soul beast. It could be said that Yi Xian had no way of defending against it. This won't do. This won't do. Yi Xian doesn't want to stay here, or directly leave. Gritting his teeth, Yi Xian charged over once more. He activated the infinite blink technique, and at the same time he activated the eternal night domain. Although Yi Xian didn't know if the eternal night domain could trap the divine soul beast, he could only try. Afterwards, Yi Xian attacked with another absolute zero. All of this would depend on the effect of absolute zero. It was unknown if the divine soul beast was careless, or if it was really affected by the eternal night domain. In short, absolute zero had actually trapped the divine soul beast. A good chance. Yi Xian suddenly moved, and the divine rule bow in his hand pulled the bowstring without the slightest hesitation. Devouring Law Divine Arrow. When the time comes, Yi Xian would like to see if he can recondense this fellow's body into an unknown void. However, as soon as Yi Xian shot his first arrow, he saw that cracks had already begun to appear on absolute zero. This was absolute zero. Could it be that this guy could actually break free from it? Yi Xian didn't have time to think. He pulled the bowstring as fast as he could. One after another, the Devouring Law Divine arrows charged towards the divine resentment beast. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom! A black vortex appeared. Yi Xian could clearly see that the divine resentment beast was constantly being sucked away by the black gas. So it turned out that this guy's original body was actually this black gas. Although he seemed to be a physical entity on the surface, that was only because he was too condensed. Although the divine resentment beast still managed to break free from absolute zero's control in the end, several black vortexes had already formed around it. Yi Xian intentionally spread these Devouring Law Divine arrows around the divine resentment beast. At this moment, those vortexes were constantly devouring the black aura of the divine resentment beast. Although the size of the divine resentment beast hadn't shrunk, it could be seen that its body wasn't as solid as before. Ding! System notification. The designated target's cultivation level has dropped. Currently the inferior 9th grade God King realm. Losing that black aura could actually cause the divine resentment beast's cultivation level to drop? Yi Xian was slightly astonished. This was something he'd never encountered before. Of course, no matter what the reason was, as long as the divine resentment beast's strength was weakened, it would be a good thing for Yi Xian. However, it seemed that Yi Xian wasn't a match for an inferior 9th grade God King at all. Yi Xian didn't have any trump cards left, so he only had conventional attacks. Fortunately, the Devouring Law Divine arrow was still effective against this guy. Absolute zero. Yi Xian didn't hesitate and attacked at absolute zero again. Since absolute zero and the Devouring Law Divine arrow could effectively weaken this fellow, then Yi Xian naturally wouldn't give up on using this method. Bang! Suddenly, the divine resentment beast's body suddenly expanded. At the same time, its 5 hands simultaneously attacked Yi Xian. It was obvious that Yi Xian had angered him. Bang bang bang. Yi Xian was continuously hit. If it wasn't for the protection of the god-slaying armor, this combo would have been enough to take his life. This guy wasn't affected by the eternal night domain at all. The first time he was able to trap him with absolute zero, it was because he didn't care about Yi Xian at all. At this moment, once he was enraged, the success rate of absolute zero would obviously drop. Fortunately, he would occasionally be able to hit it. Blood flowed from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. This guy was truly too difficult to deal with. Apart from using the Devouring Law Divine arrow, Yi Xian actually couldn't find any other way to deal with him. This battle directly became a test of perseverance. Either Yi Xian was able to weaken the divine resentment beast to its lowest level and kill it, or Yi Xian would be trapped by the divine resentment beast. Chapter 2804. 2392 God Seal Clan. The only thing that Yi Xian found strange was that this fellow didn't use any special abilities at all. It was actually just a pure physical attack. According to the system's introduction, the Divine Resentment Beast could inherit a divine ability or special law power from a fallen god emperor. However, he didn't expect that the Divine Resentment Beast that Yi Xian was facing didn't have one at all. Of course, even if that was the case, it would still be extremely difficult for Yi Xian to clean it up. If he really did inherit a special ability, then Yi Xian probably wouldn't be able to hold on a long time ago. The battle lasted for an entire 7 days. During these 7 days, Yi Xian relied on the defense of the god-slaughtering armor to forcefully resist the Divine Resentment Beast's attacks. Afterwards, he continuously searched for opportunities to activate Absolute Zero, and then used the Devouring Law Divine Sword to continuously weaken the Divine Resentment Beast. Finally, on the 7th day, Yi Xian successfully annihilated this fellow with the Devouring Law Divine Arrow. In the Ancestor realm, there was actually no concept of time. After all, other than those ghost flames, there were no other sources of light. After defeating this Divine Resentment Beast, it was finally time to reap the rewards. When Yi Xian saw the Calamity Crystal core, he hesitated in his heart. Just who should he give this Calamity Crystal to? The system had notified him that it could be used to strengthen the sword attendant, or it could be used to devour himself. It could be said that these two choices each had their own benefits. For a moment, Yi Xian couldn't make up his mind, so he temporarily put it away. He planned to make his choice after leaving the Ancestor realm. Time flew by. Very quickly 30 years had passed. In these 30 years, nothing had happened within the 9 directions 60,000 realms, and the main god battlefield had also fallen into a stalemate. The great powers of the 9 directions divine domain all knew that Yi Xian had made a great contribution in the main god arena, and had been rewarded by the Divine Master to enter the Ancestor realm to search for treasures. Therefore, no one dared to cause trouble at this time. After all, when Yi Xian left, it was equivalent to the Divine Master personally helping to supervise the 9 directions 60,000 realms. Yi Zhong's development was also progressing step by step. Although it was 30 years in reality for the God realm, there wasn't much of a difference between 30 years and 3 years. On this day, Yi Xian finally came out. He was in a sorry state, but his face was filled with ecstasy. This was because after Yi Xian dealt with the Divine Resentment Beast, he immediately encountered the remnant will of a god emperor. Moreover, the system notified him that he could subdue it into a Dharma idol. The special ability of the 10,000 Venerables bloodline was the 10,000 Venerables, and that Dharma idol could actually be subdued into one of the 10,000 Venerables. How could Yi Xian let it go? In these 30 years, Yi Xian had continuously searched the Ancestor realm. However, the remnant will of a god emperor was extremely rare, so he had only subdued 3 Dharma idols and fused them into his 10,000 sovereign bloodline. There was a cooldown time for the use of the Dharma idol, but Yi Xian obtaining 3 Dharma idols at once was equivalent to obtaining 3 trump cards. How could he not be excited? In addition, Yi Xian discovered quite a few resources while searching for the remnant will. In these 30 years, Yi Xian hadn't increased his cultivation at all. However, the resources he'd obtained were enough to make him incomparably happy. On this day, when Yi Xian came out of the Ancestor realm, no one noticed him. Yi Xian didn't hesitate and quickly rushed back to Yizhong. However, before arriving at Yizhong, Yi Xian first encountered Fei Yan. To be more precise, when Yi Xian was rushing, Fei Yan appeared behind him out of thin air. "Young master, you're out." Fei Yan smiled as she looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian wasn't the slightest bit surprised that Fei Yan was able to appear by Yi Xian's side out of thin air. However, at this moment he was clearly heading back to Yizhong, so why did Fei Yan come over earlier? Therefore, Yi Xian also smiled and said, "Could it be that something happened to the 960,000 realms? Why did you come to find me in advance?" "Young master, please be at ease. Everything is fine in the 9 directions 60,000 realms. This little girl came here in advance because she wanted young master to move to our clan's residence first so that young master can make arrangements. So that's how it is. Alright, lead the way." Before Yi Xian participated in the main god arena, Fei Yan had gone to look for his clansmen. In the blink of an eye, 30 years had passed. Of course, Fei Yan had already brought his clansmen over. In reality, Fei Yan's clansmen and the Divine Talisman clan Xian tribe were currently living together. Because of the special nature of the two clans, they had set up a mysterious formation. Even in the 9 directions 60,000 realms, very few people knew their location. However, many of the people from the Divine Talisman clan had already joined the Yi sect. Because of this, they would have a reasonable reason to go out and train. Yi Xian was the sect master of the Yi sect, and also the honorary grand elder of the Profound clan. Naturally, the Profound sect didn't have any objections to joining the Yi sect. However, it was difficult for Fei Yan's clansmen to make arrangements. In reality, Fei Yan's clansmen were not simple either. Fei Yan's clansmen were actually the powerful and mysterious God Seal clan. In the God realm, many people knew about the legends of the God Seal clan. However, most of the God Seal clan members had already fallen in the ancient times, and the remaining God Seal clan members were being used by various forces, constantly decreasing. Currently, there were not many survivors of the God Seal clan. Fei Yan's clansmen only numbered around 3,000, but they could already be considered one of the larger tribes of the God Seal clan. Without a doubt, the God Seal clan was a spirit god clan, but the innate talent of this clan was a seal. This was an incomparably powerful power. Moreover, there was no need to cultivate at all. As long as one was a member of the God Seal clan, they could automatically learn it. They called it the Life Seal. Once the Life Seal was activated, any living being within a designated area would instantly lose a certain amount of lifespan and cultivation. This was the terror of the God Seal clan. Their innate talent was enough to strike fear into the hearts of countless people. However, the innate talent of the God Seal clan was the art of sealing. Sealing was also a mysterious sub-profession. It was similar to the professions of the God Talisman Masters, Array Masters, and Artifact Masters. However, the job of a sealer was not to take someone's life, but to seal them. The God Seal clan possessed many unique sealing techniques, and the most well-known one was their one-word God sealing lattice. In other words, with a single sentence, they could seal an expert's godhead, rendering them unable to use even half of their god force. This was the terror of the God Seal clan. Many years ago, Fei Yan's clansmen were taken care of by Yi Xian's chief master, the ancient god emperor. After that, they found a secret place to recuperate. However, after the mysterious fall of the ancient god emperor, just like the other powers that relied on the ancient god emperor, Fei Yan's clansmen were also wiped out. This time, when Yi Xian rose once more, they naturally came to seek refuge without any hesitation. In their hearts, even though Yi Xian was only a provincial governor of the 9 directions 60,000 realms, his future achievements definitely wouldn't be limited to just this little bit. When Yi Xian arrived at the gathering place of the Divine Talisman clan and the God Seal clan, Yi Xian didn't expect that the two clans would get along so well. They even teamed up to create a sealing divine talisman. Of course, Yi Xian didn't care what they did. This time, Yi Xian prepared to bring the two clans into the Yi sect. Yi Zong had his own secret realm. Yi Xian's meaning was very simple. He wanted to give the two clans a separate secret realm. This way they'd be even safer. After all, the Yi sect was Yi Xian's lair, so the safety factor was naturally much greater. Chapter 2805. Of course, many changes could happen in the span of 30 years. Of course, there would be many changes in the span of 30 years. Even though it would not affect the entire Kunlun God region and the Master God battlefield too much, there would still be some small movements within the 9 directions 60,000 realms. As soon as Yi Xian returned to the Yi sect, someone reported to him that a mysterious force had been pouring into the 9 directions 60,000 realms for the past 10 years. This force seized large amounts of rare resources, ores, various secret realms, snatched devouring beasts, occupied the border areas, and even directly robbed small sects and so on. Before Yi Xian left, he specifically told him to carefully observe the internal situation. Thus, when the information was gathered, Yi Xian understood who was causing trouble. If it wasn't that exterminated organization, who else could it be? This organization was really persistent. As long as they could find an opportunity, they would not let it go. This organization would always think of ways to increase their strength. However, the exterminated clan that Yi Xian felt was incomparably powerful was no different from bandits in Yi Xian's eyes. Yi Xian replied, "The first thing Director Yi did was to prepare to deal with this exterminated organization. At the very least, He would make the exterminated organization disappear quietly in the 9 directions 60,000 realms. Pass down the order. Have all the sects in the 9 directions 60,000 realms prepare. In 10 days the entire realm will move together and kill these ants for me. Yi Xian gave the order. As the supreme ruler of the 9 directions 60,000 realms, he had the right to mobilize the power of the entire 9 directions 60,000 realms for his own use. Following Yi Xian's order, countless sects, clans, cities, and other forces quickly moved out. This was because Yi Xian had promised that rewards and punishments would be carried out according to the military merit system. Naturally, he would receive the support of all the forces. The military merit system had been in place for 30 years, and many people and forces had obtained a lot of benefits from it. Then, at this moment, the operation within the 9 directions 60,000 realms would be able to obtain military merit. No one would refuse such a good thing. 10 days later, an army of over 30,000 people set off from the Yi sect. Of course, there were even more people moving at the same time, so many that it was difficult for Yi Xian to count them all. From hundreds of thousands to a few hundred people, all of the forces sent out their teams, hoping to obtain some benefits from this operation. Organization annihilation. Ever since Yi Xian entered the God realm, the organization that had been troubling him, this time Yi Xian wanted to teach them a lesson. Countless experts set out, and one by one, the strongholds of the destroyed organizations were pulled out. Of course, there might not be any organizations that were destroyed, but as long as they had a bad record, they would all be wiped out this time. The 30,000 people that Yi Xian brought with him were the so-called headquarters. One had to know that these 30,000 people were all experts at the Divine Lord realm or above. A portion of them were experts sent by the various powers, and the other portion were soldiers that Yi Xian had exchanged from the ancient Zither space through the military subsystem. A large group of valiant soldiers charged straight into their target, the Heaven-Sealing Mountain. The Heaven-Sealing Mountain was a huge mountain range, and there were many divine beasts here. At the same time, the environment was very harsh, so very few people would come here. However, it was also because of this that the organization was chosen as the headquarters. The headquarters of the entire 9 directions 60,000 realms. Organization Annihilation thought that hiding here and carrying out their plan was perfect, but they didn't know that Yi Xian had long since viewed them as a thorn in his side. They thought that Yi Xian was a trusted regional governor, so he didn't have as much control over the entire 9 directions 60,000 realms as the other regional governors did. However, they underestimated Yi Xian's methods and also underestimated Divine Master Mi, Yu's support for Yi Xian. In the past 30 years, Yi Xian clearly wasn't here, but because of his previous arrangements and Mi Yu's strong support, the entire 9 directions 60,000 realms had already submitted to him. Lord Regional Governor, this is the place. According to our intelligence, the headquarters of those people is here. Resources are constantly being plundered from the various realms, and according to the information we have, they will all be sent to this Heaven-Sealing Mountain. A guide said to Yi Xian. He was in charge of tracking this matter, so he had a relatively clear grasp of the information regarding the destruction of the organization. Alright, I understand. Take 20,000 people and surround this place. Don't let go of any of the important intersections. I'll personally bring people in. Yes, Lord Regional Governor. Since Yi Xian wanted to uproot the entire organization here, he naturally wouldn't let a single one of them go. 20,000 people seemed to be a lot. However, it also depended on the cultivation of these 20,000 people. The 20,000 people with the lowest cultivation level were not weak. After arranging everything, Yi Xian brought the remaining 10,000 people into the Heaven-Sealing Mountain. Obviously, the organization also knew that a great calamity was about to befall them. However, they didn't have the chance to leave even if they wanted to, so they set up countless defenses in hopes of stopping Yi Xian's footsteps. Not long after Yi Xian entered the Heaven-Sealing Mountain, he was attacked. Over 100,000 totem beasts, under the cooperation of hundreds of thousands of members of the organization, directly attacked Yi Xian. Unfortunately, they were so weak. Yi Xian waved his hand and 5,000 experts moved out. It didn't take long for the hundreds of thousands of people to be wiped out. Just these ants wanted to stop Yi Xian? It seemed that destroying the organization was too naive. As he advanced, Yi Xian's goal was incomparably clear. He wanted to directly find the headquarters of the organization. This was the headquarters of the organization, so it was naturally impossible to say that there were no experts guarding it. In reality, this place was guarded by the 4 great heavenly kings. The so-called 4 great heavenly kings were not bad. They were actually 4 divine emperor realm experts. Divine emperor realm powerhouses were indeed strong, but it was a pity that they had to fight against the entire ninefold 60,000 realm. This time Yi Xian brought a total of 30 divine emperor realm experts. This was because Yi Xian already knew the true strength of this place, so he didn't recruit any more experts. If Yi Xian was willing, not to mention 30 divine emperor experts, even 30 godly venerable experts wouldn't be impossible to gather. In the 9 directions 60,000 realms, the leaders of the large forces were basically all godly venerable experts. As long as Yi Xian gave them some benefits, these people would definitely come immediately. The benefits that Yi Xian needed to give were actually just official positions. Of course, at the moment there was no need for Yi Xian to use those people. Just the divine emperor experts were enough. The army advanced extremely quickly. In just a few days they had already arrived at the headquarters of the organization that was destroyed. Who are you waiting for? Why did you attack my sect? Extermination. A divine emperor stage organization extermination heavenly king led his men to block in front of Yi Xian, and loudly asked him. Chapter 2806. If Yi Xian could force him to retreat without making a move, didn't that mean that Yi Xian had the ability to defeat or even kill him? Yi Xian didn't do that. Instead he faced him calmly. Without a doubt, Hong Yuan's brother, who had been infuriated, slowly calmed down. Are you sure you weren't behind what happened to my sister? Upon hearing this, Yi Xian raised his head and said calmly, I said it wasn't me, so it wasn't me. If I really did it, then do you think you'll still be alive to find trouble with me? As for your sister, I don't even know who she is. Why would I find trouble with her? Don't worry, since I'm involved in this matter, then I'll take care of it to the end. Just wait, I'll catch the mastermind very soon. Yi Xian always kept his promises. Moreover, Yi Xian knew very well that he had to find a solution to today's matter. If he didn't catch the mastermind, then similar incidents would happen again. However, Yi Xian still underestimated these people's methods. After Hong Yuan's brother left temporarily, Yi Xian began his investigation. He asked Fian and the people from the fire division to help him investigate, but unfortunately, it was to no avail. Of course, Yi Xian also knew that the power he could use now was far too little. However, Yi Xian didn't pay too much attention to it. Since the mastermind had found trouble with Yi Xian the first time, then there would be a second time, a third time. It could be said that as long as these people didn't achieve their goal, then similar incidents would happen again and again. Another few days passed. On this day, Yi Xian was just staying in the training camp. However, a sudden attack broke out. They were all from the training camp. 5 of them, 5 heavenly gods from the 10th division. The strangest thing was their reason. That's him. That's right. It's that Yi Xian. He's gone too far. He's a complete bully. That's right. Today we must find him for revenge. Why? He's a genius. Fine, we're just ordinary people. We can give in to him or even avoid him. But why does he have to force us step by step? Since he doesn't want to give us a way out, then let's die together. When the 5 of them arrived in front of Yi Xian, they first discussed with each other before directly attacking Yi Xian. The moment he made his move, it was a killing move. It was as if he wanted to perish together with his opponent. Go to hell, you bastard. Boom! Yi Xian didn't even understand what was going on when he was suddenly attacked. While the 5 of them were discussing, Yi Xian also heard them. However, he didn't expect them to be talking about him. However, the 5 of them did not hesitate at all when they said they would attack. Ding! A powerful attack has been detected. Host, please be careful. Along with the system notification, Wei Zhentian once again controlled the Godslayer to automatically protect its owner. Ding! Host, please take note. The host does not have enough soul fragments. The defense has been broken. Boom! Yi Xian was sent flying by a punch. He was actually sent flying by a punch despite the defense of the Godslayer. Fortunately, Yi Xian was not hurt at all. He only took a few steps back. However, this was still unacceptable. The asterisk a minute, what are you doing? Yi Xian looked at the 5 of them, anger rising in his heart. 5 upper-level heavenly gods. Could it be that these fellows ate the wrong medicine? QWPM Humph, you know what we're doing. Everyone attack together and kill him. The 5 of them once again charged at Yixian. Yixian grabbed the Godslayer and prepared to summon the 1,000 beast sword servants at the same time. However, he suddenly held back. It was obvious that these people were being used by someone else. They were looking for trouble with him. If Yixian attacked now, he might not be able to defeat these people. Even if he did, he would only be playing into the hands of the mastermind. Therefore, even though Yixian was unwilling, he could only hold it in. Everything was the work of the mastermind. As for these people, they were just innocent people. It could even be said that they were victims as well. All of you stop right there. Fine, since you're looking for trouble with me, then tell me clearly. How did I offend you? Haha, how did you offend us? Yixian, oh Yixian, to think that you're number 1 on the genius leaderboard. With your talent and strength, we're no different from ants in front of you. Yixian, you can kill us. We're not strong enough. We're just ordinary people. We can't beat you and we don't have anyone to back us up. We'll admit it. However, why are you toying with us and even killing our families? Yixian, my Lu village has 182 people. They're all ordinary people I brought up from the mortal realm. How are they a threat to you? Or rather, how am I a threat to you? Why are you killing all of them? The 5 of them went back and forth. Their voices were extremely agitated, to the point that they were incoherent. However, Yixian still understood. These people were saying that Yixian had been causing trouble for them since a few days ago. At first, he wanted them to hand over their families to Yixian and make them his slaves. Of course, they didn't comply. Then Yixian used all sorts of methods to deal with them. He even destroyed their families with one last breath. F*CK. Damn you! Yixian cursed when he heard this. Yixian, how dare you be so arrogant? Brothers, let's attack together. Today we'll kill him. Even if we die, we'll avenge our families. The 5 of them were extremely agitated. However, Yixian was even more agitated than them. All of you stop. Boom! 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 Thousands of God-class mounts appeared in an instant and surrounded the 5 of them. However, they didn't attack. At the same time, Yixian said to the 5 of them, "A bunch of fools. What do I need your families for? Slaves? Do you think that I, Yixian, lack divine crystals? Mother***, are you trying to accuse me again? You accused me of being a pervert before. Why, what is it this time?" Yixian was extremely agitated. Wasn't that person in the dark a little too much? Slaves? It looked like he had to pay a visit to the slave pavilion. "You 5 pigs, come with me now." Yixian looked at the 5 of them and ordered them in an unquestionable tone. To be honest, if the 5 of them hadn't been forced into a corner, they wouldn't have dared to cause trouble for Yixian. Yixian was one of the strongest in the training camp. Other things aside, Yixian's title as the number 1 on the genius leaderboard was enough for him to enjoy a lot of privileges in the training camp. After being scolded by Yixian, the 5 of them shriveled up. They had mustered up their courage to look for Yixian. In reality, they were already prepared to die. They had no intention of leaving alive. However, cultivation wasn't easy. Chapter 2807. Entering the main god battlefield at this point, Yixian's actions to destroy the organization were all successful. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Yixian's actions were simply thankless, but Yixian knew that he had to do this. Of course, during the period of annihilating the organization, how could Yixian not take some benefits? The corpses of the divine beasts that were killed weren't of much use anyway, so Yixian devoured them. Thus, Yixian's cultivation had already risen to the 3rd grade High God King stage. It could be said that even Yixian was very satisfied with such a fast level notification. After all, after entering the God King stage, it was no longer that easy to raise one's level. The resources needed to devour, as well as the quality of the divine beasts, had greatly increased. Perhaps there were still some remnants of the organization left in the Kunlun God domain, but they were no longer of any use. Coupled with Yixian's encirclement, it could be said that the organization no longer had a foothold in the Kunlun God domain. However, the system's notification still didn't ring. This made Yixian understand that this organization probably had quite a bit of power in the other god domains. His peaceful life didn't last for too long. Yixian seized the time to recruit troops because he knew very well that the main god battlefield was the most important thing he had to face in the next period of time. Just as Yixian had expected, Miyu once again conscripted troops. This was because the demon god domain had once again sent reinforcements. Clearly there would be a big move. Yixian didn't hesitate at all. He recruited 1 billion soldiers in one go, as well as 20,000 experts at the Divine Lord stage and above, and directly rushed to the main god battlefield. This time Yixian wanted to personally go over. Although there was no rule that said that a regional governor needed to personally command his own army, Yixian still wanted to go take a look at the main god battlefield. The vast army even took more than half a year to teleport into the main god battlefield. After all, there were simply too many people. This wasn't the first time Yixian had come to the main god battlefield. In fact, he'd even lived in the sky above the main god battlefield for a long time. However, a main god battlefield that hadn't started fighting was completely different from a main god battlefield that was currently fighting. Yixian quickly arrived at his own camp. Many people were very surprised by Yixian's arrival. Of course, Yixian bringing 20,000 experts over was still very exciting. Kuan Buyu had already entered the main god battlefield a long time ago. When he saw Yixian arrive, he immediately introduced the situation of the main god battlefield to him. Lord Regional Governor, the main battlefield of our 9 direction 60,000 realms is a 100,000 kilometer section of the city wall, as well as the 1,000 cities behind this section of the city wall. Other than that, there are 108 resource points and a medicinal pill resource point. Outside the city walls, we occupy 68 outpost cities and 6 strongholds. Resource points, cities, strongholds, city walls, these were the core components of the entire main god battlefield. I can understand city walls, cities, and strongholds, but what about the resource points? Yixian asked. He really didn't understand these things. Reporting to Lord Regional Governor, because of the frequent battles in the main god battlefield, the divine power is generally more violent. Only in the cities with defensive restrictions can the soldiers cultivate and rest in peace. As for the resource point, as the name implies, it is a place to gather resources. When the Overgod's battlefield was first established, special restrictions were laid down on it. The Overgod's battlefield produces thousands of special resources. These resources have extremely high requirements, such as God's blood and other special substances. Only the Overgod's battlefield meets these requirements. And these resources are very effective for the soldiers to raise their cultivation levels. However, they are evenly distributed in the middle of the battlefield, so if you want to obtain resource points, you have to send soldiers to snatch them. Moreover, you have to guard against the enemy's counterattack. As for the pill resource point, it's because there are special divine flames and divine power there. The effect of refining pills can be increased by several times. It can be said that all of the soldiers in the 9 direction 60,000 realms rely on the support there. Yixian nodded. In reality, he knew very well why this was the case. This was because after entering the main god battlefield, whether it was a soldier or a general, they had already made up their minds. Thus, almost no one would bring too many resources with them. Moreover, even if he brought it over, this was the main god battlefield. The consumption was simply unimaginable. Thus, resource points became the focus of the competition. It could be said that many times the true outbreak of conflict was often because of resource points. Both sides had a giant wall, and that giant wall was the key to victory. There were countless cities behind the giant wall, but those cities could only be stationed and recuperated. It was impossible for them to provide resources. If he wanted to obtain resources, he could only charge into the buffer zone outside the city walls. In that case, conflict was unavoidable. Fortunately, there were also cities and strongholds in the buffer zone. This way it would be of great use. These cities and fortresses would be garrisoned with sufficient soldiers in order to protect their own resource points. In addition, Lord Regional Governor, there are 5 magic treasure resource points in the center of the battlefield. These magic treasure resource points are the key to the competition. These magic treasure resource points will automatically produce an ancient magic treasure every month. It can be said that the time to fight for magic treasure resource points is the most brutal time of the war. In addition, there are some random resources. No one knows how these random resources appeared, but once they do, they will undoubtedly start a war. Kuan Buyu continued. Yixian nodded. This was the main god's battlefield. All sorts of laws and energies filled it, making it seem a bit chaotic. Once the main god's battlefield opened, then naturally no resources would be missed. Outside the battlefield there were many other areas. However, neither side would explore them. After all, those places were even more dangerous. It was only during the resting period that some soldiers would go treasure hunting together. It wasn't that there weren't any gains, but there might not be a lot. After Yi Xian gained a rough understanding of the situation in the main god's battlefield, he began to think carefully. He now understood the general situation of the battle in the main god's battlefield. Normally, when there was no order from the Divine Lord, they would only snatch resources from each other to strengthen themselves. Once the Divine Lord's order was given, a large-scale battle would erupt. The rules of the battle were extremely clear. If one wanted to strengthen themselves, then they had to snatch resource points. Otherwise, staying on the city walls would undoubtedly be equivalent to courting death. Oh right, Kuan-Buyu, where did the materials to refine the pills come from? Could it be from a resource point as well? Chapter 2808. Unknowingly, he had actually charged into the core region of the battlefield. It should be known that in the Master God's battlefield, super experts would fall at any time. Even though the Master God's battlefield was a super existence refined by two Master Gods, the chaos inside was still unimaginable to ordinary people. On the battlefield of the Masters of Gods, the most dangerous thing was not the other treasure hunters, nor were the traps that could appear at any time. Instead, it was endless negative emotions. Ding! System notification. Host, please take note. Host, please leave this place immediately. Otherwise, your mind will be eroded by the endless killing intent, and you may even lose your nature. The system's warning sounded. Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. Without the slightest hesitation, he released his divine sense and arranged a strong barrier around his body. At least this way, he could resist the endless killing intent for a short period of time. In the core area, endless murderous intent and countless remnant thoughts filled the entire space. These were all left behind by the super experts. Madness, bloodshed, brutality, howling, crying, and other negative emotions filled the entire core area of the Master God space. From time to time, there would be echoes of the battle between the experts. What was the echo of battle? Echoes were easy to understand, and the echoes of battles referred to the various powerful attacks of super experts during battle. Even after tens of thousands of years, they would still remain. Back then, the sword intent in the Lingbo Lake was actually a kind of echo. One could only imagine how terrifying that was. Yi Xian did not dare to make the slightest movement. He did not feel it when he had rushed in. But now Yi Xian finally understood how terrifying this place was. Die for me. Boom! A bolt of lightning instantly exploded, shattering even the void. However, this was not real. It was an illusion that possessed great power. Yi Xian clearly knew that it was just a replay of the battle, but he was still intimidated by the aura of those two powerhouses after just one glance. Poochie! He spat out a mouthful of blood. Yi Xian was seriously injured. So strong. They were truly powerful. Even though these two experts had been dead for tens of thousands of years, the afterimages they left behind were still able to severely injure Yi Xian. Yi Xian knew that if he stayed here, he would only be waiting for death. Therefore, no matter how dangerous it was, Yi Xian had to leave this place. On the side of Yi Xian was the ruins of a fortress. Clearly, a battle had broken out there. It could be said that the more dangerous a place was, the more dangerous it was. But Yi Xian had no other choice. If he stayed outside, the afterimages of battle that could appear at any time, or even the erosion of killing intent and negative emotions would be enough to kill Yi Xian. However, if they went to the fortress, they would have some hope of surviving. This was a test. Either Yi Xian could find a way to survive in the ruins of the fortress, or Yi Xian would be left outside to die. As for which choice to make, it was already obvious. Between waiting for death and gambling, Yi Xian naturally chose the latter. Ding! Warning! 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 Please leave this place immediately. Please leave this place immediately. The system kept sending out warnings, but Yi Xian could only smile bitterly. Of course he wanted to leave, but he could only take one step at a time. First of all, the pressure here made it impossible for Yi Xian to move as fast as he could. Secondly, the inexplicable echo attacks that appeared from time to time were enough to force Yixian to move forward slowly. Boom! A loud sound rang in his ears. Yixian didn't need to turn around to know that it was just an afterimage of battle. But even if he knew, the pressure from the afterimage still injured Yixian. Move forward one step at a time, continuously moving forward. Yixian had no choice. Everything was up to the will of the heavens. Perhaps the heavens were still looking out for Yixian. So he successfully entered the ruins of the fortress. Just as Yixian had expected, the number of afterimages of battle here increased, and Yixian was injured again and again. Yixian was helpless. He could only grit his teeth and move forward. There was nothing else he could do. These attacks were not targeted at Yixian. These attacks were just afterimages, and they were just afterimages, but they were already enough to make Yixian so miserable. One could imagine how powerful these afterimages were left behind by powerful experts. One could also imagine how cruel this battlefield of the sovereigns was. Yixian's divine will was attacked time and time again. There were even a few times when it was almost broken through. If his divine will defense was broken through, it was possible that in the blink of an eye, Yixian would be corroded by the killing intent here and become a walking corpse. As for Yixian's body, it was even worse. It was damaged time and time again, and then repaired time and time again with the help of his powerful bloodline. However, even before the wounds from the last time were completely healed, new wounds had already arrived. If someone saw Yixian's appearance now, they would probably not be able to confirm that this was not a person. This was because apart from his silhouette, they could not see any trace of a person. This was the battlefield of the sovereigns, a powerful and cruel battlefield of the sovereigns. There's light. Suddenly, Yixian discovered a ray of light in front of him. It seemed to be something like a door. Yixian was not in the mood to investigate anything now. He walked in almost instinctively. However, the moment he walked in, he fainted. After an indeterminate amount of time, or at least Yixian did not know how much time had passed. Finally, Yixian's body moved slightly. Under the powerful recovery of his bloodline, Yixian, who was on the verge of death, finally woke up. However, Yixian was still extremely weak. Yixian smiled bitterly. This time he had suffered a great loss. Most importantly, he did not know how to get out of here again. He could not possibly be trapped here forever. Ding! System notification. Host has triggered the effect of life and death refinement. Body's recovery ability has temporarily decreased. Ding! System notification. Host has been severely injured. Host's cultivation level has temporarily decreased. Host's current cultivation level has dropped to lower rank 1 true god. Another piece of bad news. Then what other bad news was there? Why not say it all at once? Fortunately, there wasn't any bad news after that. Ding! System notification. Host, please take note. Host has entered a special sealed space. Special sealed space? What did that mean? Yixian sat up. Currently, Yixian was extremely weak. However, the situation around him made him feel strange. At first, Yixian did not notice. However, now Yixian realized that the place he was in was like a body of water. There were specks of stars in the sky. The reflection on the surface of the water was another starry sky. What was going on? Chapter 2809. Resources of the main god battlefield. However, the Netherworld Crane clan was proficient in the Netherworld laws after all. Therefore, there were a few people who directly hid themselves beside Yixian. These people appeared without any warning. Even the godly expert beside Yixian didn't notice them at all. What kind of power of law is this? Yixian couldn't help but be puzzled. System, detect the power of law of these people. Ding! System notification. Designated target possesses the law of silence. The law of silence could completely conceal one's aura. As long as one didn't actively expose it, it would be impossible to detect it unless one used a special magic treasure or special ability. There was such a power of law? It was impossible to say that Yixian wasn't moved. One had to know that even the concealment ability of Yixian's wings of the gods wasn't this powerful. However, the system didn't indicate that Yixian could forcefully devour it. Thus, even if Yixian was moved, he couldn't do anything about it. Go to hell. Suddenly, an enemy from the Netherworld Crane clan appeared less than 2 meters away from Yixian. As soon as he appeared, he instantly launched an attack. This person held a black ball in his hand, and as he attacked Yixian, the ball began to emit an enormous amount of energy. Ding! Warning! Warning! The host is in mortal danger. The host is in mortal danger. Ding! The system automatically took over the authority and adopted an emergency defense plan to summon the Divine Martial Saint Turtle Dharma Idol. Ding! The Dharma Idol has been destroyed. The alarm has been lifted. This series of changes meant that Yixian didn't even have the time to make the slightest movement. In other words, if it wasn't for the system acting in time, Yixian would have already died. An incomparably violent force instantly swept through the entire battlefield. Regardless of whether it was the enemy or us, at least hundreds of thousands of people were killed by this wave of power. Yixian still had a lingering fear in his heart. This time it could be said that he almost died. One had to know that the Divine Martial Saint Turtle's Dharma Idol was the strongest defensive Dharma Idol that Yixian had obtained in the Ancestor Realm. The only ability of this Dharma Idol was its extremely powerful defense. Moreover, the Dharma Idols obtained from the Ancestral Land were all at the God Emperor realm. However, even this kind of defense was shattered after blocking it. One could imagine how powerful this attack was. It could be said that after this attack, the experts who were fighting were also greatly affected. More than half of them even died, and the rest weren't much better off. Only the hierarch expert beside Yixian didn't suffer much damage because he was protected by Yixian's Dharma Idol. Yixian couldn't help but want to ask, "What is that? System, what exactly is that black ball that attacked me just now?" Ding! System prompt target, Sphere of Law. The Sphere of Law was a special magic treasure that was reinforced by a special formation and material by an expert who continuously compressed the power of the laws. This magic treasure was a one-time explosive attack magic treasure. Depending on the power of the laws injected into it, it would have different attack effects. Moreover, it was extremely easy to self-destruct. It could actually store a law attack like this? It could be said that this was beyond Yixian's imagination. One had to know that the power of the laws was an illusory thing. He wasn't water, fire, sand, or earth, so he could store it. However, the people from the demon god's divine realm actually created such a thing. The power of the laws could only be borrowed, so once it was used, it would immediately disappear. Yixian really couldn't understand how the people from the demon god's divine realm did it. How did they store the power of the laws in the sphere? Of course, perhaps the most important thing was the sphere that stored the power of the laws. That thing was the true rare treasure. Only now did Yixian truly understand the dangers of the battlefield. It could be said that the moment he appeared on the battlefield, he was undoubtedly a piece of fat meat in the eyes of his enemies. He was afraid that his enemies would do everything they could to kill him. After all, Yixian was a provincial governor. Once he killed Yixian, the morale of the people from the Nine Directions divine region could be imagined. Following the failure of the Sphere of Law's attack, it also announced that the Netherworld Crane clan was no longer able to withstand the attacks of the Nine Directions' 60,000 realms. A moment later, Yixian had already occupied a city, and he quickly lost several resource points with the city as the center. It was only now that Yixian truly walked into the resource point for the first time and carefully examined what kind of resources these resource points produced. In the main god's battlefield, it was naturally impossible for every resource point to produce the same resources. The resource point that Yixian had arrived at mainly produced a type of divine power stone. This was a product that only belonged to the main god's battlefield, so its name was just a random one. This divine power stone was similar to an ordinary divine crystal, and could directly absorb the divine power contained within. Of course, divine power was secondary, the key was production. It could be said that this production rate was terrifyingly high. This was because in the main god's battlefield, there would be people dying at almost every moment, and when a great battle broke out, even more people would die. As for the main god's battlefield, it had its own rules. Simply put, these god power stones were formed from the condensed divine power of those who had fallen. Could be said that it was a very bloody product. However, no one would care about this. As long as they could increase their own strength, even if they told those people to eat the corpses of their enemies, there would still be many people who would be very happy. Moreover, after tens of thousands of years in the main god's battlefield, there was indeed a lot of violent divine power. This violent divine power couldn't be directly absorbed, but the divine power stones could purify it. Therefore, speaking of which, the Divine Power Stones were really good stuff. In this resource point, apart from the Divine Power Stones, there were many other resources. Of course, the most popular was undoubtedly the Law Stones. Most Law Stones only contained a single type of nomological power, but occasionally there were 2, 3, or even more types of nomological power. These Law Stones contained different amounts of nomological aura. However, no matter how many there were, it was definitely good news for ordinary soldiers. After all, this would allow them to comprehend the nomological power at a close distance. Back in the Kunlun realm, hundreds of thousands of geniuses fought for the opportunity to comprehend the nomological power. Of course, although Law Stones could be used for comprehension, the effect wasn't very good. However, as ordinary soldiers, what else could they hope for? It could be said that in every Divine Realm war, many powerhouses would be born, and it was precisely because of this Law Stone. Of course, Law Stones couldn't leave the main god's battlefield either. Once they left, they would immediately lose the nomological power contained in them. Chapter 28:10. Powerful Stronghold. This resource point was mainly filled with all kinds of ores. Other than God Power Stones and Law Stones, there were also some ores that could be used to forge magic treasures. Afterwards, Yixian walked towards the next resource point. Compared to the first resource point, which was a bare mountain peak, the second resource point was a forest. Here there were many plant resources. Naturally, the resources here could not be better used to refine pills. Among them, the most special one was probably a fruit called the God Corpse tree. The most special thing was that the growth of the God Corpse tree was actually related to war, because the nutrients it absorbed were the killing intent on the battlefield. It could be said that as long as the God Corpse tree was in a battle, it would be able to grow rapidly, and it would even be able to produce fruits in a few days. The God Corpse fruit could be refined into a very unique pill, the Killing Chi pill. After consuming this pill, there was no other effect but to increase one's killing intent. Killing intent might not seem too important on the surface. It did not increase one's cultivation, nor did it increase one's strength. However, this kind of pill was the most popular in the Overgod battlefield. This was because, in fact, every time the Overgod battlefield ended, there would be a large number of non-combat casualties. These people could not stand the influence of the killing intent and were scared out of their wits, or perhaps they had gone berserk. Killing intent could directly affect a person's mind. No matter how strong you were, you could still be affected. And in the Overgod battlefield, there were tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of battles erupting at any time. One could imagine how strong the killing intent was. Consuming this killing intent pill could effectively prevent the killing intent from corroding one's mind. At the same time, it could also strengthen one's killing intent. Naturally, this thing was liked by people. However, the production of this pill was very limited. Yixian patrolled the resource points that he'd seized, but he hadn't found any resources that were worthy of his eyes lighting up. Of course, the total amount of resources was still very large. However, Yixian naturally couldn't devour them. After all, these were all soldiers. Seizing a city wasn't enough to satisfy Yixian. Thus, after a short period of rest, Yixian once again gave the order to fight. However, this time Yixian wouldn't be at the front. After all, if another one came out of the sphere of law, then Yixian definitely wouldn't be able to withstand it and wouldn't be able to defend against it. Yixian led his army to continuously attack several cities. After all, with the help of 10,000 experts, how could the enemy possibly resist? Very quickly, Yixian's army arrived in front of a stronghold. However, Yixian had no choice but to stop here. It was no longer that simple to attack a stronghold. Fortresses were generally equipped with an absolute flight restriction. In other words, it was impossible to fly into the fortress. When attacking a stronghold, even the army that Yixian brought along could only be carried out as if it was an ordinary siege. Of course, this was not the main point. The main point was the stronghold's defense. Every stronghold had its own special protective barrier or formation. It could be said that it was not an easy task to take down a stronghold. However, Yixian couldn't just give up like this. With a wave of his hand, 100,000 vanguard army charged forward. Yixian wanted to see exactly what kind of defensive restrictions this stronghold had. Charge. Kill. If 100,000 people were to move out from the sky and the ground, it would not seem like much. However, just charging from the ground was already very spectacular. Fortunately, this stronghold was large enough. Otherwise, these humans would have already surrounded the stronghold. On the city walls, all sorts of attacks instantly erupted. Light flashed, and multicolored light filled the entire battlefield. The strength of an individual in such a battlefield began to seem so weak. Through his divine will, Yi Xian could clearly see the charging soldiers on his side being continuously struck by various types of attacks before falling. On top of the city walls, the enemy could calmly prepare one big move after another. There were even a few people, dozens of people, condensing the power of the ancient code to launch an attack. However, the siege troops below the city walls could only use their own divine power shields to resist. Suddenly, 100 pillars of light descended from the sky. In just an instant, over 100 people were vaporized. Following that, the pillar of light actually began to move. As long as it hit someone, they would immediately die. What kind of attack is this? Yi Xian asked in astonishment. Reporting to the provincial governor, this is the simplest method of attack for the stronghold's defensive restrictions. We call it the God-slaying light. The God-slaying light is a special God-slaying stone that the soldiers in the stronghold infuse with divine power. Then the God-slaying stone will transform into a powerful energy attack. Yi Xian nodded. The power of this God-slaying light wasn't simple. However, Yi Xian didn't even have the time to take a few more glances at the God-slaying light when another attack suddenly exploded. From within the stronghold, a huge black ball suddenly flew out. As soon as the black ball landed outside, it immediately exploded. First, a vast force directly crushed a portion of the soldiers who were attacking the stronghold. After that, it turned into a huge devouring ball that sucked in the surrounding people. This kind of attack was extremely similar to Yi Xian's devouring law divine arrow. It was just that it was several hundred times larger. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Boom. Accompanied by a few loud sounds, several incomparably powerful Dharma images appeared on the battlefield. Not only were these Dharma images extremely powerful, they were also extremely large. Perhaps it was because they were all summoned from the demon god's divine domain, but they all looked like divine beasts. However, Yi Xian's personal follower explained, Lord Regional Governor, this is the unique protection of the stronghold. In every stronghold, there will be dozens to hundreds of Dharma images. These Dharma images are usually like sculptures in the stronghold, unremarkable, but once there is a battle, they can be activated to protect the stronghold. These Dharma images can only last for a few hours at most. Of course, they can be recalled at any time, but the cooldown time is only a few days to a dozen days. If they are recalled quickly, the cooldown time can be even shorter. It can be said that they are extremely difficult to deal with. It only needed a few days of cooldown. It could last for several hours. Yi Xian was slightly shocked. One had to know that he was also able to summon his Dharma image, but it would take hundreds or even thousands of years to cool down. Moreover, it wouldn't appear for a long time. He never thought that the guardian Dharma image in the main god's battlefield would be so powerful. No wonder there were so few strongholds. If they were all strongholds, then there would be no way to fight at all. 100,000 people, a total of 100,000 people. However, not long after the guards appeared, they were almost completely annihilated. Even Yi Xian didn't have the time to give the order to retreat. Chapter 28:11. Ding! Congratulations to Host for recovering. Ding! Host has broken through. Host is now a superior grade 5 heavenly god. Did he finally recover his strength? The corpses of the demonized fishmen were continuously delivered to Yi Xian for him to deal with. However, Yi Xian still had to wait for a long time before he could recover his original strength. It could be said that Yi Xian felt like he had suffered a huge loss by exchanging his level for the right to use the seals. Fortunately, he had recovered his strength. That brat is now heavily injured and everyone's attention is on the demonized fishmen. He only has a maid by his side. Why don't we make our move tonight? That's right. We can't wait any longer. That brat dares to ruin our plans. No matter what, we can't let him get away with it. Alright, then it's decided. 7th Prince, I'll give you a chance to perform this time. I'm sure you know what to do. Don't worry. Leave this to me. A group of people were secretly discussing something in a tent. So they were the ones who wanted to target Yi Xian. It turned out that the 7th Prince wasn't the only one who wanted to deal with Yi Xian. In other words, this scheme wasn't as simple as it seemed. After these people left, Yi Lixio called for his 4 guardians. After a brief discussion, they all left. Of course, Yi Xian didn't know about this. His current mission was very simple. Occasionally, he would check on the 2 seals. Other than that, he would just wait for the corpses of the demonized fishmen to come to him. In the realm of the gods, the 10 sun cycles alternated. Strictly speaking, night didn't exist. However, there was still a day. Ding! System notification. Hostile intent detected. Host, please take note. Hostile intent? Yi Xian frowned slightly. At this moment, he was with Fian, inspecting the invincible seals to see if they were in good condition. A new round of battle hadn't begun yet, so it was very quiet. Now that Yi Xian had recovered his strength, no one was worried about Yi Xian's safety. This wasn't the first time Yi Xian had only brought Fian along. In fact, Yi Xian didn't want Fian to come along. However, because of Yi Xian's injury last time, she didn't leave Yi Xian's side. Yi Xian couldn't chase her away, so he had no choice but to agree. Hearing the system notification, Yi Xian's footsteps paused. He immediately released his spiritual sense and looked around. There was no one here, and he didn't seem to find any suspicious characters. However, Yi Xian trusted the system 100%. Since the system said that there was hostility, then there must be someone nearby. Moreover, it was an enemy. That brat seems to have found us. Yes, it's very likely. He's actually able to see through our disguise. Not bad. However, only death awaits him. QWPM. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In an instant, 4 figures appeared around Yi Xian and Fian. However, even if these 4 people jumped out, Yi Xian could only see them and not sense them. A special ability. A special ability that could block the detection of divine sense. Yi Xian was slightly shocked. System. Check their cultivation levels. Ding. System notification. 4 people have been specified. They are respectively at the lower 6th grade of the spiritual god realm, the lower 3rd grade of the spiritual god realm, the lower 4th grade of the spiritual god realm, and the upper 9th grade of the heavenly god realm. What the fuck? Yi Xian was slightly stunned. 3 spiritual god realm experts and a peak heavenly god realm expert. Are they planning to kill me? Who are you? What do you want? Yi Xian gazed at the 4 of them as he asked this question, and he'd already drawn Godslayer. Little fellow, what do you think we want? You're courting death for daring to spoil our plans. Then we'll fulfill your wish today. Haha, what a joke. Just the 4 of you? Even though Yi Xian was slightly nervous, he wouldn't show any weakness in his tone. Moreover, he wasn't far from the campsite, so he believed that reinforcements would arrive very quickly if a battle really erupted. However, those mysterious figures' words instantly destroyed Yi Xian's hopes. Kid, you're still so arrogant when you're about to die. What? Do you think that someone will come and save you if you fight us? Haha, you're too naive. Do you think we didn't make any preparations when we chose this place to ambush you? Damn it. As soon as he heard this, Yi Xian knew that the situation wasn't so simple. System, check the surroundings. Ding. System notification. Chain restriction has been detected. Chain restriction? It's actually a chain restriction. A chain restriction was more terrifying than an ordinary restriction, because a chain restriction referred to a series of restrictions that were directly combined to be used. Regardless of its function, it would take a lot of time to crack it. And Yi Xian believed that these people wouldn't give him the time to do so. Sure enough, at this moment, the 4 of them shouted without hesitation. Attack! This guy is a restriction grandmaster. Don't give him the time to crack the restriction. Kill! Shouts of killing suddenly sounded out as the 4 of them decisively charged towards Yi Xian. Domineering sword cut. Consecutive sword cut. 10 Baron 100 destruction. Devil trapping spell. The 4 of them used their killing moves as soon as they attacked. Once they attacked, the 4 of them used their full strength. Ding! Warning! Warning! Host is under attack by an unstoppable force. Ding! Host's life is under threat. System automatically activates defense. Ding! Usable superpower detected. Invincible defense activated. Bang! 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 With Yi Xian at the center, the entire ground was collapsing swiftly. and a mountain behind Yixian was even directly transformed into powder. However, this wasn't what surprised Yixian the most. It was Fei Yan who surprised Yixian the most. At this moment, Fei Yan's wings shook, and she actually vanished without a trace. Of course, Yixian couldn't take care of himself right now, so he only had time to take a glance at Fei Yan. A powerful attack instantly erupted, but the campsite that wasn't very far away didn't notice it at all. No one noticed that a battle of life and death was actually occurring here under the cover of the chain restriction. That kid is probably dead this time, right? Even a peak low-rank domain enlightened spirit god would be instantly annihilated by our combined attacks, let alone a kid at the heavenly god realm like him. He's probably dead. The four of us trained these four super divine abilities painstakingly since we were young, and our tacit understanding with each other is so high. The might we unleashed in an instant is already equivalent to the attack of a mid-rank domain enlightened spirit god. It would be strange if he didn't die. The four of them stopped what they were doing and gazed indifferently at the ruins as if they were certain that Yixian was dead for sure. Chapter 28:12. Resurrection altar. Paying such a huge sacrifice just to obtain this one resource point. One could imagine how hard they would guard it. In that case, what could be produced from this resource point? In truth, there was no need to mention the other resources in this resource point. But there was a certain altar that made everyone's eyes go red with envy. Because this altar's function was resurrection. As long as one's soul was not destroyed, even if one's godhead was shattered, even if one was left with only a wisp of soul, as long as one reached this altar, one could be resurrected quickly. This was the frightening thing about this altar. The resurrection ability, if used properly, was unimaginable. Moreover, with this resource point, the morale of the soldiers would be boosted even more. Before every battle, if one could promise the soldiers that they would be resurrected even if they died in battle, one could imagine how high the morale of the soldiers would be. Of course, if one wanted to use this altar, one would need to consume a terrifying amount of resources. However, even so, Yixian still wanted to take down this special resource point. 3 strongholds. Moreover, these 3 strongholds were clearly stronger than ordinary strongholds. This was because they had 2 walls and more defensive facilities. If he wanted to take it down, he would have to pay a huge price. However, when Yixian proposed to attack the special resource point, he didn't expect it to be unanimously approved. That's right, for these experts, they probably cared more about their lives than the soldiers. After all, it wasn't easy to cultivate to this stage. If he wanted to attack this special resource point, he would definitely need a large number of soldiers. In one breath, Yixian transferred 500 million soldiers over. A total of 500 million people gathered from all directions. It could be said that Yixian's actions directly caused the various powers in the demon god's domain to be incomparably nervous. It was already very rare to see hundreds of millions of people in a local war, let alone an entire 500 million people. Of course, as long as Yixian didn't attack them, they wouldn't act recklessly. Just as Yixian was about to attack, a nearby envoy sent over a messenger. This envoy also saw Yixian's actions. At the same time that he was incomparably shocked, he immediately sent an envoy. The envoy's general meaning was to ask why Yixian wanted to use so many people. Wasn't he afraid of attracting the attention of the divine masters from both sides and causing an all-out war? Yixian lightly smiled and replied, "Could it be that if we continue to be in a stalemate, an all-out war won't break out? Since there will be an all-out war sooner or later, why not take advantage of this opportunity to fish for more resource points?" After that, the envoy didn't continue to send people over to inquire. Of course, even if he sent people over, Yixian wouldn't give up on his plan. On this day, it could be said that the 9 Directions 60,000 Realms had become the most eye-catching place in the entire main god battlefield. This was because Yixian had launched the largest local war in the entire main god battlefield. In the sky and on the ground, the black mass of troops was densely packed. As far as the eye could see, the sea of people was simply endless. Experts were also inserted into the army. This time the battle was to snatch special resource points and attack the 3 strongholds that the enemy was guarding at the same time. All troops kill. Yixian abruptly swung the god's slaughtering sword in his hand. Soon after, the entire sky darkened. That was because there were simply too many soldiers flying out from the sky, to the point that it had completely obscured the light. For 2 whole days, Yixian was in the dark. This was because 2 days was enough time for so many people to pass through. The battle had been incomparably intense from the very beginning. It was impossible for the enemy to give up on this special resource point so easily. Moreover, their experts could revive immediately after they died. This battle was destined to be an incomparably difficult one. However, Yi Xian had made up his mind. Just like what Yi Xian had said to the envoy, if he went to snatch the resource point now, it would be a local war after all, so the losses would be a lot more laughable. However, if he waited until an all-out war broke out to snatch the resource point, then the losses would be even greater. Yi Xian would rather pay a heavy price to obtain more resource points and raise the level of the remaining soldiers as much as possible than just wait like this. After all, battle merits were everything. Only battle merits would determine whether Yi Xian would lose or gain from participating in the main god's battlefield. 200 million people. Both the enemy and us had lost 200 million people. Almost all of them were annihilated by Yi Xian, but the price Yi Xian paid was 170 million casualties. And this didn't even include the soldiers who died in order to stop the enemy's reinforcements. However, in the end, Yi Xian still obtained the special resource point as he wished. And it took an entire year. However, it wasn't until Yi Xian took down the special resource point that many people understood Yi Xian's true intentions. At this moment, Yi Xian's resource point city had actually formed a semi-encirclement, enveloping another group of enemies within. It was obvious that this group of enemies was already a turtle in a jar. Those 3 strongholds were the best barrier, enough to prevent the enemy from sending reinforcements. The area that was circled was a total of 200 resource points. Yi Xian directly sent out an envoy, giving the enemy a choice. They could either retreat or be uprooted by Yi Xian. It could be said that the enemy had no choice at all. They, who were half surrounded, could only retreat. After all, it was impossible to defend to the death. Yi Xian fulfilled his wish and took down his original plan, circling a large area of resources. But at the same time, it also gave him the nickname of a tyrant in the main god battlefield. The meaning of this nickname was very simple. It meant that Yi Xian didn't cherish the lives of the soldiers at all. However, no matter what others thought, Yi Xian would only do as he wished. Moreover, the soldiers and experts of the 9 directions 60,000 realms did not have the slightest bit of emotion. After all, taking down so many resource points was undoubtedly a good thing for them. Batches of pills were constantly produced, and piles of magic treasures were constantly distributed to the soldiers, allowing their overall strength to rapidly increase. Yi Xian had sacrificed 200 million people in exchange for the overall strength of the remaining 1 billion people. This was the main god battlefield, and the growth rate of the resources was countless times faster than in the outside world. In addition, there were many things that could not be obtained in the outside world, which was enough to make the soldiers extremely happy. In fact, more than 3 million soldiers who had contributed to the war had obtained the law stones that they had yearned for even in their dreams. Of course, after obtaining the law stones, whether or not they could comprehend the laws would depend on their own efforts. After Yi Xian circled these resource points, he stopped the war. Instead, he used all his strength to increase the strength of his subordinates. This kind of self-initiated local war did not have any military merits. It could be said that very few people would do such a thing. Whether it was the Kunlun divine realm or the various powers of the demon god realm, they were all waiting for an all-out war to break out again. 50 years. For an entire 50 years, the entire main god battlefield was incomparably calm. Other than the occasional local war, it was basically peaceful. As for Yi Xian's side, not a single local war had broken out in 50 years. However, 50 years was enough. Chapter 28:13. Chaos World Annihilation Formation. Following the Divine Master's order, the soldiers and experts of the Kunlun God Realm and the Demon God Realm quickly gathered. It was only at this moment that they understood what it meant to be insignificant. From the sky to the ground, there were people everywhere. This was the first time that Miyu's figure had appeared on the Overgod battlefield. No one knew if this battle would decide the final outcome, but everyone knew that countless people would definitely die in this battle. Yi Xian stood in front of his army as a provincial governor. Behind him was a square formation. With the start of an all-out war, the number of soldiers invested would no longer be in the tens of thousands, but in the hundreds of millions. Even though Yi Xian led more than 1 billion soldiers, it was only a dozen or so square formations, At the same time, an all-out war broke out and one powerful magic treasure after another appeared on the battlefield. These were all battlefield Dharma treasures. Dharma treasures that would only appear on the battlefield. Charge! Miku waved his hand, and in an instant tens of billions of soldiers rushed out. How terrifying was a number of 10 billion soldiers. However, this was just a probe by the vanguard. At the same time, the enemy also welcomed them with billions of soldiers. This kind of battle was simply frightening. Even experts seemed so weak. Yi Xian saw a mid-tier divine emperor charging into the enemy's formation with his own eyes. At the beginning, he could still see some movement. However, in just a short while, the divine emperor realm expert lost all signs of life and was drowned by the crowd. God's domain's law envoy Yi Xian, listen up. Just as Yi Xian was observing the battle in front of him, an imperial guard of the divine palace arrived beside him. Yi Xian, listen up. Yi Xian naturally didn't dare to hesitate and immediately replied. The divine palace guard clearly recognized Yi Xian. He first nodded slightly to Yi Xian before speaking. Under the orders of the Divine Lord, the Divine Domain's law envoy Yi Xian, quickly select 5,000 soldiers to the Divine Domain's dispatch envoy. Divine Domain's dispatch envoy? The person in charge of the entire army? Why did you want him to look for him? However, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't ask. Yes, Yi Xian has received the order. After conveying the order, the Divine Palace Guard smiled and said to Yi Xian, Lord Law Envoy, you must cherish this opportunity. The Divine Lord thinks very highly of you. Although Yi Xian was puzzled, he still smiled and said to the Divine Palace Guard, Thank you for your reminder, brother. It is our duty to serve the Divine Lord. However, brother, do you know what mission the Divine Lord has for me? Aha, you'll know when you get there. I guarantee it's a good thing. The Divine Palace Guard didn't say much, so Yi Xian naturally didn't ask any further. After sending off the Divine Palace Guard, Yi Xian discovered that everyone beside him was incomparably excited. Yi Xian asked in confusion, What's wrong with you guys? Is there a need to be so excited? A Divine Emperor stage expert walked over to Yi Xian and said, Lord Divine Lord has never participated in the Divine Domain War before, so it's not strange that you don't know. Lord Divine Lord has given Lord a fat job. Don't tell me that Lord hasn't noticed that the other provincial governors are very envious? Needless to say, Yi Xian released his divine sense and quickly saw the surrounding provincial governors. As expected, they were all looking at Yi Xian with envy. Yi Xian was still extremely puzzled, but he still quickly chose 5,000 experts and walked towards the dispatcher. It could be seen that the people chosen by Yi Xian were all extremely excited. Perhaps only he, the provincial governor, didn't understand what was going to happen. Soon, Yi Xian arrived at the dispatcher's location. However, when Yi Xian saw the dispatcher, he was slightly astonished. The reason for that was because the dispatcher was a divine beast. Of course, the dispatcher's status was even higher than Yi Xian's, so Yi Xian didn't dare to be disrespectful. The God's Domain's law envoy, the 9 directions and 60,000 realms regional governor greets the dispatcher. Yi Xian said to the dispatcher. The dispatcher slightly raised his head to look at Yi Xian, then said, You're here. Go, you've been assigned to the 5th district of the Primal Chaos Annihilation Formation. You'll be in control there. Yi Xian arrived at the so-called 5th district of the Primal Chaos Annihilation Formation with an incomparably puzzled heart. However, when Yi Xian saw the thing in front of him, he couldn't help but be fiercely shocked. This was a giant sword. To be more precise, the entire Primal Chaos Annihilation Formation was a formation constructed from 49 giant swords. Each sword was 10,000 meters tall and constantly emitted powerful fluctuations. Even though Yi Xian had never seen it before, he now understood that this great sword was a super strategic magic treasure. As for the 49 giant swords, 30 of them were directly controlled by the Divine Palace Guards. Only 19 were distributed to the various provincial governors. The experts beside Yi Xian were all incomparably excited. A high-grade Divine Emperor actually knelt on the ground in excitement and kowtowed towards the giant sword. System, what is this thing? Ding. System prompt. The target is too powerful. The system is unable to detect it. No way to detect it? Just as Yi Xian was wondering how to control it, he saw his subordinates impatiently running to various positions. The high-grade divine emperor from before also came to Yixian's side and said to him, Lord Regional Governor, the control of this primal chaos world exterminating sword is very simple. Please ascend to the main altar. There, you will decide the target of the attack, and we will constantly instill divine power and the power of laws into the primal chaos world exterminating sword in groups of 500. This time we will definitely be able to earn enough military merits. Only after hearing that person's words did Yixian understand how to use this thing. Thus he naturally didn't hesitate and directly walked towards the main altar. After Yixian ascended the main altar, it quickly rose into the air. Ding! System prompt. Host has received an unknown power strengthening. Divine sense has increased by 10,000 times. Ding! System prompt. Host has received an unknown power strengthening. Divine sense has increased by 10,000 times. Ding! System prompt. Host has received an unknown power strengthening. Divine power has increased by 10,000 times. The 3 consecutive notifications caused Yixian's heart to tremble. A 10,000 times increase. At this moment, Yixian directly released his divine sense. In an instant, Yixian felt as if the entire battlefield was within his eyes. In the battle ahead, Yixian was actually able to see the movements of a soldier. Of course, it was still impossible to sense the entire main god battlefield, but he could sense about half of the distance. At the same time, 3 illusory short swords appeared in front of Yixian. A strand of divine sense entered Yixian's spiritual sense. Chapter 28:14. 10,000 times amplification. It turned out that these 3 short swords represented the number of times Yixian could attack. The experts below continuously poured their divine power into them in order to condense these short swords. Of course, as for the power of the short sword's attack, only Yixian would know after using it. The order to attack hadn't arrived yet, so Yixian only silently observed the battle in front of him. A battle of 20 billion people, but it was only a probing attack. They didn't even have the support of a strategic magic treasure. It was likely that it would only appear in the main god battlefield. Suddenly, a voice sounded out in Yixian's ears. 5th District, free attack once. Yixian was slightly taken aback. He didn't expect that he would be allowed to freely attack once without making a move elsewhere. He didn't know if Miyu had specially given him a chance to practice or something else. However, Yixian naturally wouldn't let go of such a good opportunity. Yixian knew that this kind of strategic magic treasure had a large area of effect attack, so he didn't dare to recklessly release it. If he wasn't careful, he might injure his own people. Very quickly, Yixian locked onto a position, and then directly activated his divine power. Yixian's divine power quickly fused into the primal chaos world exterminating greatsword. Suddenly, Yixian felt his divine will automatically lock onto the enemy. It could be said that this sudden change caught Yixian off guard. Only now did Yixian realize that the primal chaos law greatsword actually had an artifact spirit. Yixian had only locked onto an area, so it was obvious that it didn't match his attack method at all. Thus, the primal chaos world exterminating greatsword automatically helped Yixian lock onto the correct target. Yixian's divine will quickly swept across the battlefield, and wherever his divine will passed, countless enemies were marked. Yixian could clearly feel this kind of marking, but no one else could see or feel it. Yixian didn't even have the time to count how many enemies he'd locked onto. Because the time was simply too short, the small sword in front of Yixian disappeared in an instant. The primal chaos world exterminating greatsword emitted an enormous light, and then a sword image soared into the sky. The sword image quickly rushed towards the battlefield, but when it arrived, it quickly split apart. Countless sword rains were emitted from the primal chaos world exterminating greatsword. The number could be set to be terrifying. Boom! 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 The entire battlefield was filled with smoke in an instant. Whether it was in the sky or on the ground, whether it was an ordinary soldier or an expert, the enemies of the demon god's domain had suffered an unprecedented blow. This was the true rain of swords. It was like rain, and countless sword images descended. The entire battlefield was shining with a dazzling light. Life at this moment seemed so insignificant. Countless enemies tried to defend. All sorts of magic treasures, divine shields, and law shields appeared one after another. Unfortunately, it was useless, Because the attack of the primal chaos world exterminating greatsword itself contained the power of a special law. One enemy after another was penetrated, and their divine deity shattered on the spot. All of this happened too quickly. It was only the blink of an eye, but Yixian was able to clearly see all of this. This was because at the same time he launched his attack, he was also supported by the laws of time. Yixian's current spiritual will speed up by 100 times. At this moment Yixian was truly busy. The rain of swords that filled the sky couldn't be ignored after being released. In order to cause the greatest damage, Yixian had to continuously lock onto his enemies. After all, if Yixian didn't lock onto a new target, then these sword images would be wasted. A 10,000 times increase in spiritual will, and 100 times the increase in the laws of time still caused Yixian to be flustered and even feel powerless. Many attacks were actually wasted. However, there was nothing he could do about it. After all, there were simply too many swords in the rain. The power of this rain of swords was definitely not small. An ordinary true god stage soldier would be instantly killed with a single sword strike. Even if they were slightly stronger, as long as they were locked onto by Yixian's spiritual will, they would endlessly attack. A moment later the attack stopped. However, hundreds of millions of people in the enemy camp had died in an instant. A terrifying number, a terrifying attack. Was this the so-called strategic magic treasure? No one would be able to withstand such a powerful attack. Of course, it was quite a challenge for him to control it. Yixian's control over his spiritual will was already pretty good, but it also caused a large amount of waste. If a single attack from Yixian was already so powerful, then what would happen if the 49 giant swords of the Primal Chaos Annihilation formation attacked at the same time? However, Yixian was well aware that once the enemy activated their strategic magic treasure, it would be impossible for them to cause such a terrifying amount of damage. Because of this attack, the Kunlun Divine Domain quickly gained the upper hand. However, it was also because of Yixian's attack that the enemy launched an all-out assault. Perhaps in Yixian's eyes, the attack of the Primal Chaos World Exterminating Sword was already incomparably powerful. However, when the war broke out, Yixian finally understood what a true strategic magic treasure was. In front of the enemy camp, tens of thousands of incomparably large divine beasts were charging at the very front. They were so large that Yixian had never seen them before. Most importantly, this divine beast was actually able to use the power of the spatial laws at will. As long as they were willing, they could summon a teleportation formation in front of them at any time. After that, their incomparably large bodies entered the teleportation formation. However, no one knew where they would appear from. It was even possible that they would directly appear in the Kunlun Divine Domain's Great Formation. On the bodies of these giant beasts there were also quite a few buildings. Countless people from the demon god's divine domain launched their attacks from within those buildings. Of course, the most important thing was that every single giant beast had a strategic magic treasure on them. Yixian didn't even know the name of this kind of strategic magic treasure from the demon god's divine domain. For the time being, he would just call it the Law God Cannon. The interval between each attack of this kind of Law God Cannon wasn't too long, but its power was extremely powerful. Although it was slightly weaker than the Primal Chaos World Exterminating Sword that Yixian was currently controlling, the key was that it could move. With each attack, tens of thousands of soldiers from the Kunlun Divine Domain would die. Most of them wouldn't even have their corpses left behind. And there were tens of thousands of these Law God Cannons. To be able to use the law of space to go to any corner of the battlefield and launch a powerful attack, such a giant beast could not be said to be weak. However, it wasn't that the Kunlun Divine Domain had no way of dealing with him. From within the Kunlun Divine Domain, millions of totem beasts charged out. Chapter 28:15. End of War. The moment these totem beasts appeared, they rushed out immediately. Each time a colossal beast from the demon god's realm disappeared, there would be countless totem beasts disappearing as well. One could say that the size of the totem beasts in front of those colossal beasts were extremely tiny, as though they were mere ants in front of them. However, these totem beasts were the perfect counter against those colossal beasts. One could often see the colossal beasts that appeared on the battlefield once more wailing and struggling. That was because the totem beasts had already tunneled into their bodies and were wreaking havoc to their heart's content. Thereafter, the Kunlun God region pushed out their own mobile strategic treasures as well. However, unlike the demon god's god region, these mobile strategic treasures of the Kunlun god region were all assembly type. Countless powerful beings gathered together rapidly. From their hands they tossed out all sorts of magical treasures. All of these single magical treasures gathered together rapidly in the air. Before long they turned into a assembly-type strategic treasure. Thereafter, these powerful beings injected their god power into it. These strategic treasures began to show their uses as well. Some of them were extremely powerful defenses, while others were extremely powerful attacks. In the blink of an eye, the initiative of the battlefield had returned to the side of the Kunlun god region. One after another, mysterious and powerful strategic treasures appeared one after another. It was only at this moment that everyone understood just what sort of magical treasures could be considered as true magical treasures. One could say that these strategic treasures could not possibly be controlled by a single person. That was because the amount of god power required to control them was simply way too immense. Even if it were the god master Mi Tong, he might not be able to control a single large-scale strategic treasure alone. Of course, other than large-scale strategic treasures, personal magic treasures were also of use at this moment. An all-out war had begun. At the same time, it was also the strong against the strong, and the soldiers against the soldiers. After all, the vast majority of experts disdained to find trouble with ordinary soldiers. In their hearts, only fighting against people of the same realm could stimulate their fighting spirit. Most of the time, if these experts didn't have an opponent, they would rather not make a move than slaughter those low-level soldiers. As for ordinary soldiers, they didn't have the qualifications to challenge experts. Of course, if an expert were to court death and run into a group of soldiers, then in order to survive, these soldiers would also fight with all their might. Shouts of killing filled Yi Xian's ears. Blood quickly flowed into a river, then converged into a lake. At every moment there were countless people dying. At this moment, Yi Xian wasn't in the mood to care about this at all, because he was currently controlling the Great Primal Chaos Annihilation Formation with all his might. It could be said that the 49 giant swords of the Great Primal Chaos Annihilation Formation were the greatest trump card of the Kunlun Divine Domain, the strongest killing move. Of course, the Demon God's Divine Domain also had its own trump card. However, he didn't use the Divine Sword to attack, but the Dharma Phantom. Because the distance was too far, Yi Xian couldn't see what kind of attack the Demon God's Divine Domain was using, but he could see the effect. Every once in a while, the back of the Demon God's Divine Domain's army would release tens of thousands of rays of light. These rays of light quickly condensed into terrifying phantoms of demon gods. Once they appeared, they would kill in all directions. It could be said that these phantoms of demon gods couldn't be destroyed at all. They could only wait for him to die. This was because these demon god phantoms were actually immune to all physical damage, all law damage, and all divine power damage. It was practically invincible. However, compared to the Kunlun Divine Domain's Primal Chaos World Exterminating Sword, the ultimate technique of the Demon God's Divine Domain was clearly weaker. Yi Xian's entire mind was focused on controlling his Primal Chaos World Exterminating Sword. Below him, 5,000 experts took turns to condense divine power for Yi Xian. And then Yi Xian launched his attacks. Battle, endless battle. Groups of soldiers rushed forward and were quickly wiped out. It was as if a blood-colored blockade had appeared in the center of the two sides. No one could do anything to the other. The corpses continued to accumulate, from 100 meters tall to a height of 10,000 meters. No one was able to count how many people had died. After all, countless people were dying at every moment. After all, every time they moved out, they would send out hundreds of millions of soldiers. What was a flesh grinder? This was a true flesh grinder, and it was even a god of slaughter. In such an environment, even the strongest mind could go crazy. This was also the main reason why the killing chi pill was needed. Yi Xian silently watched the battlefield. In fact, he also saw his subordinates being sent out in groups. He watched as the soldiers and experts he brought with him fell just like that. Unfortunately, this was war, this was the battlefield of the main god. There was no room for choice, no one. From the Divine Lord Miyu to an ordinary soldier, they didn't have the right to choose at all. The war continued. Yi Xian didn't know who started this war, but one thing was certain. Only when one side admitted defeat would the war end. However, once they admitted defeat, they would have to pay an extremely high price. Thus, until the last moment, no one would admit defeat. Day after day, year after year, Yi Xian controlled his primal chaos world-exterminating sword and killed countless enemies. Miyu then issued another 3 conscription orders. Just the 9 directions 60,000 realms sent out nearly 30 billion people to participate in the war. Finally, the war was over. It could be said that when the news of the war's temporary end arrived, everyone's hearts were numb. Even Yi Xian was the same. There was no joy at all, only numbness. However, the war wasn't really over. It was just that it had once again turned into a local war. On this day, Miyu sent someone to find Yi Xian. When Yi Xian arrived at Miyu's side, he found out that after several negotiations, Miyu had finally gotten the demon god realm's divine master to agree not to carry on such a fearless war. Instead, they would hold a treasure-snatching competition. This time, both sides would send out a godly venerable, 100 godly emperors, 1,000 godly kings, and 10,000 godly lords. And these people would enter a secret realm. That secret realm produced a special white stone. It was actually completely useless, but it was extremely rare. Furthermore, it was incomparably dangerous. There were countless divine beasts there, and there were even some strange things that existed there. This time, their goal was to see which side could obtain more of these white stones in 3 days, thus deciding the outcome of the war. This secret realm had a total of 86 entrances. Both sides occupied 43. Obviously, this was not the first time this secret realm had been used for such a thing. Chapter 28:16. White Jade. Logically speaking, Yi Xian, as a law envoy and regional commander, shouldn't have been chosen to fight for the treasure. However, it was clear that Miyu had high hopes for Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't refuse and followed the group into the secret realm. The secret realm was huge and the teleportation was random. Therefore, once he entered, Yi Xian didn't hesitate and immediately hid himself. Based on his current cultivation at the first-grade Divine King realm, if he met a Divine Emperor realm expert, he wouldn't be able to defeat him. The random teleportation made it impossible for anyone to know whether they were enemies or friends. Perhaps only the 2 Hierarch realm experts could run amok. Of course, even if it was them, once they were surrounded, they wouldn't have a good time. Since they were chosen to come here, how could the Divine Lord not prepare magic treasures for everyone? This was a treasure that would decide the outcome of the war. For example, before Yi Xian entered, Miyu had given him an interspatial ring. Only now did Yi Xian open the interspatial ring to see what was inside. When Yi Xian checked the universe ring, he was slightly astonished because there were actually 3 treasures within the universe ring. A jade pendant, a token, and an ancient map. Yi Xian knew about this jade pendant. Although it looked like a jade pendant on the surface, it wasn't. In fact, it was a special magic treasure that contained a law attack. The one in Yi Xian's hand was the defensive magic treasure that Miyu had personally prepared for him. In other words, this thing could even save Yi Xian's life at a critical moment. As for that medallion, Yi Xian also knew that it was a special medallion that was specially used to seal totem beasts. Similarly, this medallion was definitely prepared for him by Miyu. So the totem beasts sealed within were naturally not simple. 1 for attack and 1 for defense, 2 magic treasures. Furthermore, they were personally prepared by Miyu. From this, it could be seen how much Miyu valued Yi Xian. As for the ancient map, Yi Xian didn't know what it was. Helpless, he could only call out to the system. System. What kind of magic treasure is this ancient map? Ding. System prompt. Data analysis in progress. Analysis complete. Ding. The 9 Revolutions Divine Annihilation Diagram is a super magic treasure that has been specially forged and then imbued with 20% of 9 special laws. Not only is this magic treasure peerless in power, it also has a special divine annihilation domain. Yi Xian was slightly shocked. He didn't expect that the last ancient map would actually be the most special existence. At this moment, the only thing that puzzled Yi Xian was why Miyu would prepare such an ancient map for him. It had to be known that this magic treasure was extremely difficult to obtain, but Miyu actually gave it to Yi Xian. But no matter what Miyu was thinking, there was one thing that was certain, and that was that Yi Xian had an extra layer of protection. With these 3 items, it could be said that Yi Xian's ability to protect himself had increased by a lot. Naturally, his confidence in this treasure hunt had also increased by a bit. Yi Xian carefully released his spiritual will to investigate his surroundings. Releasing his spiritual will allowed Yi Xian to sense his surroundings, while also being detected by other people's spiritual will. Thus Yixian had no choice but to be careful. Of course, the reason he released his spiritual will was also to search for the white jade that had a specific target. Not long after, Yixian found a piece of white jade. Sure enough, it was useless to Yixian. It could be said that if it wasn't for the fact that this jade was given the mission of seizing treasures, it wouldn't be worth a single cent. White jade was very widely distributed. Moreover, it seemed that as long as one was in this secret realm, no matter what kind of terrain one was in, it was possible to find this kind of white jade. There was no pattern to his growth, but it was extremely rare. This forced the people who participated in the treasure hunt to continuously expand their search range. Of course, there were also people who weren't willing to search for white jade. They were more willing to reap without sowing, and they were more willing to wait to rob others. At this moment, Yixian was carefully searching every place. These white jade stones were well hidden. Although it looked like white jade on the surface, it was possible to find it in the trees. Yixian had actually been on high alert the entire time. However, after searching continuously, he didn't find any enemies or divine beasts, so he subconsciously focused more of his attention on searching. Another one. Yixian's figure moved as he quickly walked towards a small mound. This was because Yixian discovered a white jade within the mound. However, just as Yixian approached the white jade, a sudden change occurred. Boom! Without any warning, a fierce attack directly exploded beside Yixian. If it wasn't for the fact that Yixian's spiritual will had always been vigilant, it was very likely that he would have fallen for it this time. Yixian's figure moved, barely dodging the attack. However, when he looked around, he didn't find anything unusual. Could it be that it wasn't a human or a divine beast that attacked me at all? This was just a coincidence? Yixian looked at the pillar of fire that shot into the sky in confusion. Just a moment ago, this pillar of fire suddenly appeared and almost gathered Yixian. Yixian felt the power of the pillar of fire, but he discovered that it wasn't too threatening. That's why Yixian couldn't help but think that this might just be a natural mutation and not a sneak attack from the enemy. However, just as Yixian was thinking this, the entire ground suddenly began to tremble. Afterwards, pillars of fire continuously appeared. Yixian didn't dare to hesitate and dodged in all directions. What was going on? Yixian frowned. As he dodged, he was incomparably puzzled. This was because he didn't find the source of any attacks. These pillars of fire were like volcanoes that suddenly erupted. They appeared without any warning, and their power seemed to be so ordinary. However, these pillars of fire had a certain regularity, as if they were setting up some sort of formation. This is bad. It's a formation. Suddenly, Yixian came to a realization. Before entering, no one had told Yixian what was inside, so Yixian didn't know anything about this place. However, Yixian believed that it was impossible for there to be no danger in this secret realm. After all, this was the secret realm that determined the outcome of the battle in the divine realm. There was no reason for the main gods of both sides to choose a safe and peaceful secret realm that they could leave after a casual stroll. Therefore, there was only one thing that could be confirmed. This secret realm that didn't seem to be anything special on the surface was actually filled with traps, and countless unknown dangers could erupt at any time. Chapter 28:17. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. At this moment, Yixian was no longer standing at his original position. Only a 100-meter-wide crater was left. However, just as the four of them were feeling smug, a voice was heard. "Why? Do you want me to die so badly?" It was Yixian's voice. The four people's expressions changed drastically. Their joint attack actually did not insta-kill a mere celestial deity realm guy. How is this possible? Unfortunately, the truth was right in front of them. They had no choice but to believe it. Step by step, Yixian walked out from the dust. There was a faint barrier of light around his body that prevented even the dust from touching him. QWPM. I'll give you one more chance. Tell me who sent you here. Perhaps I can spare your lives. Yixian was indeed shocked at that moment. These people's attacks were too unexpected and too powerful. Yixian couldn't defend himself at all. If the Undying system had activated its invincible defense at the last moment, Yixian would probably be dead by now. You're fine? You want something to happen to me? You think you can rely on 4 ants? Humph, you deserve to die. You actually wasted my absolute defense. Since you won't tell me, it looks like I'll have to find the answer myself. Spiritual control. This time, Yixian's spiritual control was targeted at the four of them. Of course, Yixian knew that it wouldn't be of any use. It was impossible to control all four of them at the same time. However, Yixian didn't intend to really control them. Of course, he'd pick the weakest among them. Yixian's spiritual control was actually just a cover. In an instant, Yixian's hand flashed and a powerful attack was launched. This was Yixian's real killing move. Deity Vanquishing Slash. Yixian's target was the peak sky god. Who asked him to be the weakest? Boom! With a slash of the sword, that person was sent flying. He didn't manage to land a critical hit? Then take this. Deity Slaying Slash. Yixian did not hesitate in the slightest since his first attack had failed. He had already decided that this time he would definitely kill someone. Boom! This time it was indeed a critical hit. The peak celestial god, who was still resisting the control of his spiritual sense, died in an instant. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. As for Yixian's spiritual perception control, it could only interfere for a blink of an eye, but that was enough. It was enough for Yixian to kill one of them. When the other three finally broke free from the control of their spiritual senses, they only saw the corpses of their companions. In such a short time, Yixian had already killed one of them. How is this possible? These unknowns were unwilling to believe that they had lost a comrade in such a short period of time. One had to know that any one of them was confident that they had the strength to kill Yixian. However, the truth was the truth. Yixian had instantly killed one of them without any pressure at all. Yixian casually took that person's universe ring, but he didn't take that person's corpse. Because Yixian had a plan for Yixian. Then you're next. Yixian suddenly turned around and spoke to that low-grade domain enlightened spirit god. His tone was so indifferent. It was like he wasn't talking about killing someone but about how good the weather was today. That low-grade domain enlightened spirit god was shocked. And it was even to the extent that he felt a chill run down his spine. His intuition told him that he had probably encountered huge trouble this time. However, he was a domain enlightened spirit god after all, and Yixian was merely at the heavenly god realm. Moreover, Yixian was heavily injured, so he didn't believe that Yixian could kill him. Kid, are you talking about me? What an arrogant kid. Today, I'll properly teach you how to respect experts. Everyone, let's attack together and kill him. Even though Yixian hadn't chosen the other two as his targets, they didn't care about morality. They only had a single objective, and it was to annihilate Yixian. As for what methods they had to use, they didn't consider it at all. The three of them attacked Yixian once more. However, could it be that they think Yixian would be completely unguarded like before? How could that be possible? Come out, 1,000 beast sword servants. Summon god rank mounts. In an instant, 1,000 god rank mounts appeared, and they split into two groups at the same time that they pounced towards one of the domain enlightened spirit gods. So, it was practically effortless to use 500 god rank mounts to trap a single domain enlightened spirit god. On the other hand, Yixian tossed Wei Zhentian over, and then Wei Zhentian took Godslayer and charged towards the targets that Yixian had chosen a long time ago with Yixian. Die! Yixian swung his fist. However, the true threat was the Godslayer. Wei Zhentian's Godslayer was even more powerful than Yixian's Godslayer, when he controlled it himself. That person was clearly flustered. They clearly had the absolute advantage, and they clearly had the strength to crush Yixian. However, as soon as they made a move, they knew how terrifying Yixian was when he went berserk. Bang! The god-slaying sword controlled by Wei Zhentian arrived at that person's side before Yixian's attack. It pierced through that person's body and shattered his godhead at the same time. That mysterious person had an extremely dazed expression in his eyes. Even at the moment of his death, he still didn't understand how exactly he died. However, he didn't need to understand. Yixian blasted that person flying with a punch. Of course, that person had no chance of surviving since a long time ago. The Godslayer swiftly flew over and took that person's universe ring. At this moment, Yixian finally turned his attention to the other two people trapped by the God-class mounts. You've got some guts. How dare you attack me? Did you think this would be the outcome before you attacked? Yixian looked at the two people mockingly. These people had set up a chain of restrictions here. This wasn't something that they could set up with their strength. In fact, after they activated the chain of restrictions, even they couldn't open it themselves. 1,000 God-class mounts were divided into 2 groups and charged continuously. The 2 people could only fight back in panic. How could they spare any time to attack Yixian? Then, which one of you wants to live? Tell me who sent you here. I'll spare your life if you tell me first. Speak. Don't test my patience. Wei Zhentian controlled the Godslayer and circled around Yixian, as if he could kill one of them at any time. Humph, kid, we underestimated your strength for not being able to kill you. However, if you want to get what you want from us, dream on. One of them shouted loudly. Yixian smiled slightly and ignored him. Instead, he looked at the other person. I'll tell you. Will you let me go if I tell you? That's right. I, Yixian, have always been a man of my word. I've said before that I'll let go of whoever tells me who's behind this. Chapter 28:18. The sapling of the ancient law fire tree. This place, for the time being, could be called a forest, and it was an incomparably strange forest. Because these trees were growing in 2 directions at the same time, it was as if this place was a mirror, and those trees were just a reflection of reality. However, Yixian knew very well that it wasn't a reflection but a real existence. Because Yixian didn't have a reflection here. Each of these incomparably strange trees was emitting countless pillars of fire. Those pillars of fire soared into the sky, but after they broke through the sky, they strangely returned to the reflection, forming a cycle. This caused the energy of these pillars of fire to not be wasted at all. Yixian looked at this space in astonishment, because everything here had already overturned his understanding. Yixian couldn't help but think that if he chose to fly towards the sky from the start, would he be like these flames and go to the other side of the reflection? In addition, Yixian also wanted to know if he could use that illusory existence to go to the reflection plane. As soon as this thought appeared, Yixian couldn't hold it in any longer and directly summoned the withered bone sword attendant. In reality, the withered bone sword attendant wasn't of much use to Yixian, but it was suitable to be used as a scout. Go pass through there. The place Yixian was talking about was beneath his feet, an existence that seemed to be the surface of a lake. At the very least, looking at it with his eyes, it was as if he could reach the reflection surface as long as he passed through that barrier. Of course, the withered bone sword attendant didn't hesitate at all, so it directly charged towards the void. Yixian watched the actions of the withered bone sword attendant with rapt attention. Closer. Even closer. Suddenly, the withered bone sword attendant seemed to have rushed halfway into the lake and directly plunged into the void. There was no reaction. Yixian didn't see a reflection on the other side. Instead, a system notification rang out in his ears. Ding, system notification. Host, please note that the withered bone sword attendant has suffered a destructive blow and is completely dead. It is unable to revive. What? Complete destruction. And he couldn't revive. Yixian was shocked. What exactly happened just now? Yixian couldn't help but want to ask, but unfortunately, no one asked. It could be said that everything that happened just now, even the slightest change, was seen by Yixian. However, the withered bone sword attendant had disappeared so easily, and Yixian didn't even know what had happened. It was clear that the withered bone sword attendant was like entering a lake, just fusing into it. However, when it completely fused into it, it was also completely destroyed. Yixian raised his head to look at the sky, then lowered his head to look at his feet. He knew that although it looked like a reflection, it was definitely not a reflection. It was an unknown existence that Yixian didn't even know about. Not daring to easily explore the area beneath his feet, Yixian directly stood up and walked forward. Yixian was a person who could afford to let go. Since he said that he didn't have the ability to explore the void, then there was no need for Yixian to continue wasting time there. He might as well continue exploring the forest in front of him. Looking at the various types of flames, Yixian knew that he might have made a huge profit this time. He originally thought that there would be some sort of divine beast, but what Yixian saw was only a treasure trove that he could collect. Yixian didn't know what this forest was, but he still knew what was inside every single tree. System, what exactly are these trees? Can you detect it? Ding, system prompt. Data collection in progress. Ding system prompt. This analysis requires 500,000 faith points. Would the host like to continue? 500,000 faith points? If it was in the past, it really would be quite a bit. But now Yixian didn't care too much about it. This was because during this period of time, he possessed the 9 directions 60,000 realms. Under Yixian's deliberate arrangements, Fei Yan had always been rebuilding his faith. Therefore, many people in the 9 directions 60,000 realms had already started to believe in Yixian. The 9 directions 60,000 realms were extremely large. Even if only a small portion of them completely believed in Yixian, it would still be an enormous accumulation for him. Moreover, he had already stayed in the main god's battlefield for so many years. Therefore, Yixian already had some faith points in stock. Alright, permission granted. Yixian agreed to the system's prompt. Ding system prompt using faith value analysis. Analysis successful. Target: Ancient Law sapling of the fire tree. Ancient Law fire tree. A special plant from the ancient era. The ancient era was an era even older than the ancient era. People could still have some records of the twilight of the ancient gods, but people only had legends about the ancient era, and there were very few real records. Of course, the primordial era, which was even older than the ancient era, was probably only a guess. Yixian never imagined that he would accidentally discover something that belonged to the ancient era. One had to know that the ancient era had always existed in legends. Even in the ancient era, people had no understanding of it, let alone the ancient era. However, the system had already said that this was the sapling of the law fire tree from the ancient era. How could Yixian not be excited? Yixian wasn't greedy as he looked at the endless forest. In his heart, he would be satisfied if he could obtain one of them. System, I want to obtain a sapling of this ancient law fire tree. Is there any way? Ding system notification. Please note that all the trees in front of the host are actually the saplings of an ancient law fire tree. What? This time Yixian couldn't hold it in anymore. The system said that this boundless forest was actually just a sapling? Of course, although Yixian was surprised, he didn't doubt it. After all, it was something from the ancient era. Then who would know so much? There weren't many records of the ancient era. It could be said that even Miamo didn't know anything about the ancient era. In fact, Miamo didn't even know about the sapling of the ancient fire tree. After all, if they knew, then countless experts would have entered to search for it. But from the looks of it, Miamo and the divine master of the demon god realm only knew that this place was extraordinary, but they didn't know that there were ancient things here. System, how do I collect this sapling of the ancient law fire tree? Ding! System notification. Host's level is not high enough, unable to provide information. System, then how much do you know about the ancient era? Ding! System notification. Host is not waiting for you enough, unable to provide information. Chapter 28:19. 2047 Unknown effects. That's right, all of this seemed to be too far away. Even if it was the ancient era, it was only a legendary existence to Yixian. However, he didn't expect that something from the ancient era would actually appear. Yixian looked at the forest. He really wanted to collect it, but there was nothing he could do. Gritting his teeth, Yixian knew that this time he could only take a gamble. The sapling of the ancient law fire tree could be said to be an existence that could only be encountered by luck, and not sought after. If Yixian missed this chance, he might not even have a second one in his lifetime. Thus, Yixian didn't want to let it go, even if he knew it was incomparably dangerous. However, Yixian was willing to gamble. Without any hesitation, Yixian extended his hand towards one of the tree trunks, and instilled his spiritual will into it in an attempt to communicate with it. Suddenly, it was as if time had stopped. Yixian seemed to have been teleported to a mysterious space. In front of Yixian was a small sapling. There was nothing around Yixian in the sapling, only silence and darkness. Everything had disappeared, whether it was the laws or everything else. It was as if everything had completely disappeared at this moment. System, what's going on? No reaction. It was as if even the system had disappeared. This was something that had never happened before. This was the first time Yixian had completely lost contact with the system. Yixian looked around, not knowing what to do. But a moment later, he walked towards the sapling. Step by step. There were no fluctuations of energy, nor were there any laws. It was as if an ordinary person was walking towards a sapling. However, it was so different. The sapling only had 2 leaves. Moreover, it looked malnourished, as if it could wither and die at any moment. Yixian gently caressed the sapling, but his heart was incomparably calm. He subconsciously said to the sapling, "How pitiful. I don't know what you need to continue growing, but since you've existed since ancient times, then I can be sure that you've been through countless years, but you still can't grow up? Little sapling, what are you? Ancient law fire tree sapling, do you possess the law of fire?" It could be said that Yixian was truly a bit stupid right now. He was actually talking to a sapling. However, Yixian himself didn't know why he was doing this. It was just a subconscious action. In Yixian's heart, this sapling of the ancient law fire tree had experienced countless years. It was already an extremely strange thing for it to be able to survive. However, not only did he survive, he didn't even grow in the slightest. From this, one could tell how lonely he was. It was unknown if it was because of this loneliness that affected Yixian, or if it was because of some other reason, but at this moment, Yixian actually began to recall his past and everything that had happened on his path of cultivation. Moreover, he subconsciously spoke to the sapling. In the outside world, the 2 people from the divine domain finally began to fight each other because of the exploration. They were constantly snatching the white jade. After all, their main mission was to bring out the jade. However, no matter how much the 2 sides fought, there was a place that no one dared to go to, because there were countless flames that soared into the sky. There were also experts who tried to enter it to see if there were any treasures. Unfortunately, before they could even enter, they would be engulfed by the flames that suddenly appeared. However, if they didn't get close to the area of flames, the flames wouldn't affect them in the slightest. Thus, as time passed, people selectively forgot about that place. No one paid any attention to that place because they couldn't enter it at all. Moreover, there didn't seem to be any treasures there. The slaughter continued without end. Countless experts fell and those white jade stones were constantly being snatched away by others. Then it was plundered by others. A bloody massacre unfolded in this secret realm. After all, for the sake of the mission, for the sake of their own divine domain, everyone's eyes were bloodshot. Only in the midst of the flames there was silence. Little sapling, do you know? Actually, when I think about it sometimes I realize that it really wasn't easy for me to walk this path. Sometimes I also doubt my future. I don't know how far I can go. Little sapling, I feel that I might be much younger than you. However, I feel that you are even more pitiful than I am. You only have 2 leaves now. In that case, according to us humans, perhaps you are just a baby. Poor you. You have no idea how long you have been here. It seems like you are even more pitiful than I am. Little sapling, can you understand what I'm saying? Sigh, I'm really silly. You're just a little sapling. How could you possibly understand what I'm saying? It was as if Yixian had just reacted and laughed at himself. He even felt that he wasn't the same as before. Because at this moment, Yixian actually gave up on all of his defenses. What divine will, what power of law, what divine power? It was as if none of this had anything to do with Yixian. He was just an ordinary person who didn't know his future. However, the instant Yixian stood up, the entire secret realm, no, not only the entire secret realm, but the entire God realm underwent an unbelievable change. Especially those who had grasped the power of the law of fire, they could clearly feel it. At this moment in the secret realm, a Kunlun divine realm upper 6th grade God King, who had grasped the law of the 9 heaven obsidian flames, was bathed in blood. Beside him, there were several fire dragons protecting him. However, it was obvious that he was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Around him, a dozen experts from the monster god divine realm were looking at him mockingly. Among them, there was even a lower divine emperor expert. It seemed that this person from the Kunlun divine realm was definitely going to die. Indeed, there was no way for him to escape. Haha, human. Let's see how you're going to escape this time. Leave your life behind. The God Emperor expert from the Demon God Divine Realm said gleefully. In his eyes, this person from the Kunlun Divine Realm had no chance of escaping at all. However, all of a sudden, the flames that the Kunlun Divine Realm expert was controlling broke free from his control. 9 fire dragons danced around in the sky happily, completely out of the control of the Kunlun Divine Realm expert. Still trying to resist? Kill him. However, it was a pity that the God Emperor expert from the demon god divine realm could no longer say his final words. That was because the 9 fire dragons had actually attacked on their own. Chapter 28:20. Eternal Supremacy. Although they were all fire elemental laws, they were also divided into countless types. However, at this moment all the fire elemental laws in the divine world seemed to be overjoyed. The power of laws? Emotions? Perhaps no one would believe this because this was already something that no one could believe. However, everyone in the divine world could feel this. It wasn't just the divine world. Even the other worlds could feel this because as long as it was the power of fire, it would be incomparably joyous. The furnace flames danced, and the heavenly flames cheered. It was as if all the flames had lost control at this moment. Big brother. A voice entered Yixian's mind, causing him to instantly wake up. At the same time, the sapling in front of Yixian disappeared. To be more precise, the forest in front of Yixian had completely disappeared. Yixian clearly remembered that word big brother. But he didn't hear it again. In the blink of an eye, all the changes stopped. As for Yixian, he was also dumbfounded as he watched everything. He didn't know what had happened. Yixian continuously released his divine sense in an attempt to find the sapling of the ancient law fire tree. But everything had already disappeared. Of course, this change didn't last long, so no matter if it was God or anyone else, they didn't notice it at all. They were only puzzled as to why the power of the fire elemental laws had become active for a moment, but they didn't know what had happened. Yixian stood on the spot and puzzledly rubbed his head. Just what had happened just now? Where did the sapling of the ancient law fire tree go? Ding! System prompt. Host is in an unknown space, completely lost contact, confirmed to be dead. The system will activate the self-destruct program. Oh. The system's voice returned, but Yixian didn't clearly hear what the system said, so he subconsciously asked, System, what did you just say? Oh. Ding! System prompt, cancel execution. Then the system's voice didn't continue. Yixian didn't think too much about it. In any case, the system often prompted him to ignore some things. This time Yixian also subconsciously ignored it. With a move of his voice, Wei Zhentian controlled the 2 god slaughtering swords to accompany Yixian as they flew upwards. Yixian lowered his head to look at the void realm and said with some disappointment, It's a pity that my withered bone sword servant disappeared just like that. Sigh, this time I've suffered a loss. I wonder where the sapling of the ancient fire tree went. As Yixian spoke, he flew upwards. However, if Yixian were to take a look at his divine deity, he would discover that there was an imprint of a sapling engraved on it. Of course, no one, including Yixian himself, would be able to see through that imprint. The battle in the outside world continued because the time to teleport away was about to arrive. This time the battle was about to end. In other words, the war between the 2 divine realms would finally come to an end, and the final victor would be decided by this final battle. The people had already fallen into a frenzy. Not long after Yixian advanced, he saw a battle. This was a battle between 2 experts from the Kunlun divine realm and 2 experts from the demon god realm. Both sides wanted to kill the other and snatch the white jade from the other party. When Yixian suddenly appeared, he heard an expert from the Kunlun divine realm shout, Quick, kill them! They have white jade on them. These words were obviously meant for Yixian. Naturally, Yixian didn't hesitate at all. Of course, he still remembered his mission. Wei Zhentian, go! The 2 god slaughtering swords quickly moved out, and Yixian also drew his rule god bow. Die! Boom! 1 arrow, just 1 arrow, but Yixian had killed an enemy. Ding! System notification. Host has killed a high-grade 3rd-grade god king. High 3rd-grade god king? What was going on? Yixian was rather puzzled because Yixian didn't seem to have the strength to instantly kill a 3rd-grade god king. One must know that what he shot out was only a spatial law divine arrow. Originally, he only hoped to restrain the enemy, and then use the law of devouring arrow to kill the enemy. But why was the enemy killed by Yixian with a single arrow? Yixian was somewhat puzzled. He once again opened the divine palace of laws and shot an arrow at another enemy. Boom! A huge devouring vortex appeared, and the enemy was actually unable to resist at all as he was directly devoured. This enemy was also a high-grade 3rd-stage divine king. Wei Zhentian directly brought the 2's universe rings into Yixian's hands. At this moment, The two people from the Kunlun divine domain looked at Yixian in astonishment because Yixian's attack power was simply too domineering. He actually killed 2 enemies with 2 arrows. Most importantly, they could all tell that Yixian's cultivation realm was only at the 1st grade God King realm. Ding! System notification. Host has obtained a special opportunity. From now on, host will forever have the title of sovereign level 1st crown. Forever? In other words, no matter how much Yixian leveled up, he wouldn't be able to remove the title of 1st crown. Special opportunity? Yixian was a little dumbfounded. Just what kind of special opportunity did he obtain? It seemed that in Yixian's heart, he didn't obtain any inheritance. Of course, this was definitely a good thing for Yixian. However, Yixian just didn't understand why it was like this. You're the God Domain's law envoy, Lord Yixian? At this moment, an expert of the Kunlun divine domain arrived in front of Yixian and asked. Yixian looked at that person, nodded and replied, "Yes, I am Yixian." This subordinate pays his respects to the God Domain's law envoy. The two of them hurriedly bowed. After all, perhaps Yixian's identity as the commander of the 9 Directions 60,000 realm was only effective in the 9 Directions 60,000 realm. However, the identity of the God Domain's law envoy allowed him to move unimpeded in the entire Kunlun divine domain. Get up. Yixian waved his hand, indicating for the two of them to stand up. After one of them stood up, he said to Yixian, "Lord Law Envoy, we won't delay any further. Right now there are only 4 hours left before we leave the secret realm. We must kill as many enemies as possible and obtain more white jade. Only then will we be able to guarantee our victory." Yixian nodded and let the two of them leave. However, Yixian himself fell into a daze. He discovered that he'd actually lost track of time. He clearly remembered that he had just entered the secret realm and had only said a few words to the sapling of the ancient law fire tree. He didn't expect that so much time had passed, and the competition for the secret realm was about to end. Of course, no matter why it was like this, the most important thing for Yixian right now was to find an enemy and snatch the white jade. Yixian's figure moved as he quickly charged towards his surroundings. Chapter 28-21. It was the 9th prince's voice again. That fellow seems like he won't be satisfied until they retreat. I wonder what benefits he'll get from making them retreat. Suddenly, Yixian's heart skipped a beat. Benefits? Who would want to see the world fall into chaos the most? It's probably the Annihilation Organization. Could it be that the Annihilation Organization is behind this as well? After all, if it was the Annihilation Organization, then it wouldn't take much effort to bribe the tiny Dark Knight Empire. When he thought up to this point, Yixian walked forward with large strides and said loudly, "We can't retreat. We can't allow these demonized mermen to leave this island. Otherwise, it'll definitely be a calamity." Yixian. It's actually him. Didn't that fellow disappear for over a year? Why did he suddenly appear again? What does he want? Everyone discussed animatedly. It can't be, right? That fellow has advanced again. My God. He's actually already at the high-level heavenly god realm. His cultivation speed is simply too terrifying. Who said it isn't? That fellow's cultivation increases every time I see him. How exactly is he doing it? Could it be that there's someone even more terrifying than him? As they watched Yixian walk over step by step, everyone consciously opened up a path for him. It was even to the extent that even those domain-enlightened spirit gods would subconsciously back off when they saw Yixian. The leveling speed that Yixian displayed was simply too terrifying. Perhaps Yixian would be at the heavenly god realm when they met him this time, but perhaps Yixian's strength would surpass them the next time they met him. No matter who it was, they would instinctively maintain a certain level of respect towards such a genius with boundless natural talent. "Master Yi, what are you doing here?" Master Moonless frowned as he gazed at Yixian. It seemed like he was aware of Yixian's other identity now. Yixian smiled at Master Moonless and said, "We definitely won't retreat." "Retreat? We definitely can't retreat. I can set up an absolute defense formation for you all to take care of the injured disciples. However, if we don't destroy this island, it will definitely cause an unnecessary calamity. Therefore, I suggest that we take advantage of the fact that these demonized fishmen are trapped to completely eliminate them here." "Humph, who do you think you are? What qualifications do you have to speak here?" Seeing that Yixian dared to ruin his plans, Yi Lixio was furious. However, Yixian was too lazy to even look at him. He continued speaking. I know what you are most worried about right now is the demon fishman's unlimited resurrection ability. Leave this to me, I will think of a way to set up a restriction so that the black gas can't enter the battle zone. After that, I will deal with all the corpses of the fishmen. This way, the more we kill, the fewer demon fishmen there are. At that time, we will have a chance of winning. That's one way. However, Yixian, do you have a way for me to set up such a restriction? It had been a long time since Yixian had set up a restriction in his room, and with Master Moonless promotion, everyone knew that he was a restriction grandmaster, even more formidable than Master Moonless. Now that they heard Yixian say this, they didn't have much doubt. However, it wasn't that they hadn't thought of a way to stop the black gas, but they had all failed. Thus, they were still somewhat conservative. Don't believe him. Just him? What right does he have to say such a thing? It was still Yi Lixio's voice. Right now, Yi Lixio wanted nothing more than to kill Yixian, but unfortunately, he could only dream about it. Suddenly, Yixian turned his head and looked directly at Yi Lixio for the first time. However, his words infuriated Yi Lixio. If you don't want to participate, you can scram. Yes, that was what Yixian had said. Yixian already suspected that this guy had been bribed by Annihilation, so he naturally wouldn't be polite. However, he didn't have any proof right now. Otherwise, Yixian might have killed him. Yu, what did you say? Yi Lixio was so angry that he couldn't speak coherently. Unfortunately, Yixian didn't plan on paying attention to him. How about this? All of Lingxian Pavilion's restriction grandmasters will come with me. I'll think of a way right now. Alright, we'll listen to you. It might be difficult for Yixian to mobilize the others, but Yixian was still able to mobilize the people from Lingxian Pavilion. Let's go as well. However, unexpectedly, the restriction grandmasters from the other factions all took the initiative to participate in Yixian's operation. Yixian didn't care about this. In any case, Yixian didn't expect them to do anything. To be honest, Yixian also had his own plans. Otherwise, why would he suggest that he take care of all of the demonized fishmen's corpses? Yixian wouldn't miss out on such a good upgrade plan. Of course, the most important thing was to stop these demonized fishmen. Yixian took his people and left. Everyone had different thoughts about Yixian. For example, the people from Emoshang's training camp felt apologetic toward Yixian because of Lu Luo. The people who also felt apologetic included Bai Lu and the other factions that had wronged Yixian. In their hearts, Yixian had left Emoshang's training camp because of their wrongdoings. Now that Yixian had returned and was willing to take action, these people felt rather emotional. Yixian led his people and quickly arrived at the bridgehead. At this time, the bridgehead was occupied by hundreds of demonized fishmen, blocking the only way for the Allied forces to attack. It seemed that this bridge was the only way to reach the island. Some people might say that it was better to use it. However, there were restrictions on the island. It was impossible to fly over. Naturally, it was also impossible to fly over. Yixian carefully observed the fishman's direction. However, in his heart he asked the system, "System, do you have any ideas?" Ding! System notification. In view of the host's current situation, the system has provided two solutions. The first solution is for the host to continue cultivating the restriction ability. When the restriction ability is strong enough, the host may be able to research a way to stop the black gas. Ding! The second solution is for the host to exchange for the corresponding special restriction from the system. F*CKU. Yixian was depressed. This system, why didn't it just ask him to exchange for it? What research? How long would he have to research? Previously, the system had activated the exchange function, but Yixian had never used it. After all, the exchange function of the system was very expensive. Alright system, help me choose a restriction that is suitable for the current situation. I want the most reasonable one. Otherwise, I won't be able to afford it. Ding! System notification. The best restriction that the host can choose is the demon slaying restriction. Once this restriction is activated, it will be able to effectively destroy the demonic energy. Yixian nodded. He had the item, but the key was the price. Yixian didn't seem to have any resources to exchange for it. Ding! System notification. The host does not have enough resources to exchange for it. The system has activated the ability to force exchange. If the host is forced to exchange for it, the host can exchange one level for the right to use it once. Chapter 28-22. This was a peak-level heavenly god realm Yao celestial projection, and that person was also a superior heavenly god. At this moment, not only did the Yao celestial projection charge towards Yixian, but that person also charged towards him at the same time. Damn it! Yixian was slightly enraged, but his hands were not idle. A ball of light exploded out from the surroundings of the god-slaying sword, directly protecting Yixian. That powerful attack was directly blocked when it arrived at Yixian's side. This time Yixian did not control the godslayer, but it flew out on its own. Of course, to be more precise, it was Wei Zhentian who made the move. Wei Zhentian had been residing within the godslayer all this while, and now that Yixian was in danger, Wei Zhentian naturally would not ignore it. When the Yao celestial projection and the superior heavenly god rushed over, Wei Zhentian did not hesitate to activate the Soul Devourer shield, blocking all of their attacks. At this time, Yixian was still standing there leisurely. Above his head, the godslayer emitted a faint light, protecting Yixian. Meanwhile, Hong Yuan's brother was constantly circling Yixian, launching fierce attacks. Of course, it was futile. At this time, the surrounding people were also shocked. They were shocked at how Hong Yuan's brother could unleash such a powerful attack. After all, Hong Yuan's brother did not have such a powerful technique in the past. At the same time, they were even more shocked by Yixian's defense. Ignored. He was simply ignoring such a powerful attack. Being able to withstand the combined attacks of a peak-level, heavenly god realm Yao celestial projection, and a superior heavenly god was something that many people could do. There were even some who could do it more easily than Yixian. However, that was because they were already very strong, surpassing Hong Yuan's brother. However, Yixian was different. Yixian's strength was only at the middle grand profound realm of the first god realm. In fact, just a few months ago he was just a true god realm trash. QWPM, however, such a person who was obviously at an absolute disadvantage was actually able to defend against the attack of a powerhouse who was many times stronger than him, and he did it so effortlessly. Under such circumstances, what could the surrounding onlookers say? It's that treasure, right? That sword seems very powerful. Someone said. At this time, the Godslayer was the most eye-catching of Yixian's performance. It could be said that the Godslayer had done all this on its own. It could be said that Yixian was the Godslayer sword itself. Could be said that it was manipulated. It could Yixian's eyes. There were many weapons and equipment. There were also many weapons that could fight god weapons. Of course, its flaws, its Zhentian heavenly weapon. If an artifact spirit was allowed to fight on its own, its power would be greatly reduced. This was something everyone knew. Therefore, under normal circumstances, no one would allow an artifact spirit to fight on its own unless it was absolutely necessary. But what was Yixian's situation now? The sword was clearly fighting on its own. How could it suppress the demon god projection and Big Brother Hong Yuan's attacks? Weapon spirits could never surpass their master's strength. This was an ironclad rule that no one could violate. They couldn't understand. Everyone was confused. They couldn't understand the current battle. They couldn't understand why Yixian's sword was so powerful. Yixian didn't want to fight. It was obvious that this guy was here for revenge because his sister had been defiled. Although this wasn't Yixian's doing, Yixian pitied him. That was why Yixian didn't want to fight this guy. Alright, that's enough. I've said it before, I didn't do anything to your sister. Although I don't know where you heard this news, but if I didn't do it, then I didn't do it. I, Yixian, will never hide anything when I do things. You didn't do it? Yixian, you damn guy. I saw you walk out of my sister's room with my own eyes. Don't tell me you still want to deny it. Yixian was amused. Saw him with his own eyes? When did you see me? Last night. Yixian, you don't have to deny it. Today I'll kill you. Yixian laughed. Last night? He didn't even leave the house last night. However, he couldn't allow this guy to continue causing trouble. Alright, I've said it before. It wasn't me. But since someone dares to defame me, no matter who it is, I'll catch them. Don't worry. Yixian will handle your matters for you. Consider it for myself. I'll keep that person's head for you. Yixian said calmly as he scanned his surroundings. At this point, Yixian naturally understood that someone wanted to frame him. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had some strength, then Hong Yuan's brother would be enough to kill Yixian. The person hiding in the dark had a good plan. He didn't even need to make a move to get rid of Yixian. Unfortunately, his wishful thinking was too good. Yixian wasn't someone who would allow others to take advantage of him. "Back off!" Yixian shouted. Wei Zhentian and Yixian understood each other. In an instant, two beams of light burst forth. Deicide slash. Yes, it was the deicide slash. In Yixian's hands, the god-slaying sword could only release one deicide slash at a time. But when Wei Zhentian took over control, he could release two at once. Boom! 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 The two beams of light forced Hong Yuan's brother and the demon god projection to retreat. Moreover, because the god-slaying sword was bound to deal a critical blow to the demon god, the demon god projection was severely injured. In fact, although Hong Yuan's brother was anxious and angry, he still had some sense of reason. From the moment Yixian didn't make a move, to the moment Yixian explained himself. Combined with his own situation, Hong Yuan's brother still had some doubts. The day before, his demon deity phantom was merely an intermediate heavenly god. However, after the incident with his sister, someone inexplicably bought him a precious treasure at an extremely low price. It was a treasure that could temporarily increase the strength of his demon deity phantom. That treasure could allow the demon god projection to unleash the strength of a peak celestial god for 2 hours. Hong Yuan's brother hadn't encountered such a good thing in the thousands of years he had spent in the training camp. Why did he encounter it yesterday? Also, it seemed that someone had deliberately led him to Hong Yuan's residence. At that time, someone had told him that his sister was in danger. That was why he had rushed over immediately. Coincidentally, just as he went over, he saw the scene of Yixian coming out. If Yixian had directly attacked him, perhaps he wouldn't have suspected anything. However, Yixian didn't make a move. Instead, his sword alone was enough to force him to retreat. Chapter 28-23. Divine Phoenix Primogenitor Dharma Idol High 6th Grade God King Realm? That was enough. Although there was still a gap of 2 grades between him and the enemy, don't forget that Yixian had the title of honorable rank, while the enemy only had the title of king rank. It could be said that Yixian was confident in killing this person. Of course, since he knew that the other party was one of the 5 imperial clans of the demon god's domain, Yixian wouldn't kill him so easily. After all, doing so might attract the attention of the enemy experts. There were less than 4 hours left until he left the secret realm. Yixian didn't want any accidents to happen in these last 4 hours. The battlefield of the main god was not a place for individuals to show off. If they wanted to show off, they wouldn't even know how they died. For example, the guy who relied on his strength to charge into the enemy's army. So what if he was strong? Ordinary soldiers could even rely on magic treasures to overwhelm you with numbers. Therefore, even though Yixian had already raised his level, he was still only emitting the pressure of a high-level god king. Human brat, die. A powerful pressure suddenly exploded out from Yixian's body. That seemingly corporeal pressure instantly surrounded Yixian. As for Yixian's performance, he seemed to be powerless. He could only rely on his own pressure to defend in front of him. However, no matter how much more strength he used, Yixian was able to defend against it. Just a little bit was enough to break through Yixian's pressure defense. Unfortunately, Yixian was unable to do so. His expression changed slightly, and a moment later he actually laughed out loud. Human brat. Looks like I've still underestimated you. You're not bad, you're actually able to resist the suppression of my pressure. It looks like if I want to kill you, I'll have to move my hands and feet a little. What an arrogant tone. He actually said that he'd kill Yixian, but he was just moving his hands and feet. Needless to say, when that fellow said such words, it actually made the people of the Kunlun Divine Region feel the same way. Even the people of the Kunlun Divine Region didn't think highly of Yixian. However, no one stepped forward to help. This was because Yixian and CI House statuses were far higher than theirs. Even if they were slightly stronger, it wouldn't be good for them to interfere in such a duel. This duel was like a confrontation between 2 armies, soldiers against soldiers, generals against generals, and kings against kings. And right now, Yixian was the king representing the Kunlun Divine Region. That CI How was the king of the demon god Divine Region. because one of them was a law user of the Kunlun divine region, and the other was a member of the 5 imperial clans of the demon god divine region. Therefore, it was impossible for these ordinary experts to interfere in the battle between the two of them, unless Yixian or Ci Hao gave the order to attack. The corner of Yixian's mouth hung a smile, but he didn't say anything. The more arrogant this fellow was, the more silent Yixian became, because Yixian really wanted to see his expression when he was defeated. Accompanied by Ci Hao's roar, Ci Hao's figure suddenly moved and pounced towards Yixian. Ci Hao's original body was a world-annihilating divine phoenix, so his grasp of the law of fire was extremely strong. At the same time he moved, 10,000 divine phoenixes appeared in the sky without any warning. These divine phoenixes were actually made up of different types of fire energy. The moment they appeared, they pounced towards Yixian. Yixian naturally couldn't just sit there and wait for death. He instantly activated his unlimited teleportation, but the divine phoenix's speed wasn't weak either. After a moment it caught up to Yixian. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. A divine phoenix directly collided with Yixian. A scorching wave of air suddenly exploded, causing the entire area to instantly turn into lava. However, Yixian was slightly stunned. This divine phoenix's attack didn't seem to be very strong at all. Originally, Yixian was prepared to be injured because he couldn't dodge this attack. However, when the divine phoenix collided with him, Yixian discovered that these divine phoenixes only had their appearances. Since that was the case, then what was there for Yixian to be afraid of? With the god-slaughtering sword in hand, Yixian's figure moved. In an instant, countless figures of Yixian appeared in the sky. This was because Yixian's teleportation was too fast, leaving behind afterimages. Yixian was either chopping, stabbing, or slanting. The god-slaughtering sword in his hand was rapidly attacking. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. One by one, the divine phoenixes were all slashed apart. This move caused the surrounding onlookers to widen their eyes. Lord Law Envoy, what method did you use to be able to directly cut through the enemy's divine phoenix that was blessed with the power of the ancient code? This is too powerful. Why can't I tell what kind of law power the Law Envoy is using? Why does it seem to me that the Law Envoy is using his sword to kill those divine phoenixes? This doesn't make sense. Those divine phoenixes are supported by the power of the ancient code. How could they be killed by ordinary attacks? Oh, damn it, how did that human do it? Although Lord Ci Hao's myriad phoenix cry isn't too powerful, it shouldn't be something that a mere first-grade god king like him can break. The key point is that human actually didn't use any power of the ancient code. How is that possible? I don't believe it. Could it be that my eyes are playing tricks on me? Everyone discussed animatedly. They were filled with disbelief that Yixian was able to kill those divine phoenixes so easily. Even Ci Hao was extremely astonished. He originally thought that just this myriad phoenix cry would be enough to injure Yixian, but now it actually didn't injure Yixian in the slightest. Thus he was naturally extremely puzzled. However, Yixian wasn't the slightest bit surprised, because he didn't even feel any power of the ancient code from these divine phoenixes. In Yixian's eyes, these divine phoenixes were merely condensed from divine power. Even if they had different attributes, they didn't have the support of the ancient code. Could it be that breaking a divine phoenix that didn't have the support of the ancient code was something to be surprised about? However, in reality, other than Yixian, who couldn't tell that those divine phoenixes possessed the support of the ancient code, everyone else could tell that not only did those divine phoenixes possess the support of the ancient code, many of them also possessed the extremely powerful power of the ancient code of fire. It could be said that Ci Hao's mastery of the laws of fire was extremely high. His movements abruptly stopped as he looked at Yixian. He was also puzzled in his heart. Could it be that this fellow grasped a special magic treasure? However, Ci Hao quickly understood that since this fellow was a law user of the Kunlun divine domain, it was reasonable for their divine master to give him some special magic treasures. Therefore, Ci Hao didn't suspect anything and continued to attack. Humph, human brat, I don't have time to waste with you. Next you can go and die. Divine Phoenix Dharma Idol. Oh, Ci Hao is actually able to summon the primogenitor's Dharma Idol. How is this possible?